makes sense. I've never gotten that with Deleuze. I'm not saying Hegel is a better thinker. I think he's a better writer. Because Deleuze just like a break, and it's like extension equals one, and the concept, the nominal concept, this concept is just what the fuck is going on? Just like a bunch of words thrown at you, and you're like sort of stuck with it.
Yep.
You know that Hegel went into philosophy because at the theological seminary they told him his style was too contrived for him to ever preach straightforward enough.
Imagine being able to have said to Hegel that you're too contrived and to be able to be that person. Because at the time, probably there was no one really pushing back. Could you imagine saying that today? It's like
that Facebook group. I was like Lady Gaga. Like I don't know her right name. Like what's her name? Like you will never be famous. Insert the real name of Lady Gaga. And like from like now it's like, oh, she's one of the most famous singers. Same with Hegel.
Or how Lacan said about Artaud that Artaud would like, because Lacan met Artaud early in Artaud's life, and Lacan apparently said that Artaud would live forever and never write a thing. And obviously Artaud died quite young and wrote extensively.
and
tells
things,
you everything
things
you
that
need to know
things
about
that influence
Lacanian
things.
Psychoanalysis.
Things that influence things too. But with that, we are, just so you guys are aware, we're streaming now.
All right,
so
I'll have to go. Bye bye.
if you want to bounce out, because I know
I have to sleep. Like this is my sleepy time.
you do that. We'll start up the AO axiomatic reading. Go sleep. Get out of here.
I have to play with the dog.
You do that, Lou. All right, everyone. I'm sure that a few of you who have not left the room in the last 3 hours are going to be, I mean, if you have the brain power to handle all the difference in repetition and everything in that section, which I will be frank, I'm not sure I do. We're going to be diving into a lot of the same complexity, because why the fuck not, right? That's the way it goes. Basically, we're setting up to continue to dive into the axiomatic, which is going to be a thing. So, where we left off, let me get 2 more things sort of going real quick. I just want to make sure that we get... All right. I want to make sure we get anyone we need in here, so we can bump up. I'm trying to annoy a couple other people, seeing if they're going to be able to join, because this is a beast of a thing, to say the least. The beast of a thing. All right. We'll see if that gives us a couple extra people as well. That'll be fun. Posting a schedule is a weird feeling. It's because no one cares about anything I do. Because we're not interesting, boring drama. Instead, what we're focused on, our piece here, is specifically the way that capitalism operates. To sort of rewind a bit, because there have been 2 big dumps of streams so far. There's going to be another one midweek, because I'm not moving on from the axiomatic until I'm satisfied, and so you're all screwed to go with me. We're talking about the move that has been made inside of Anti-Oedipus, as Deleuze and Guattari are talking about the anthropological sort of shift that has happened as we've moved from a code-based society to overcoding under the despot with master signifier, to something very different inside of capitalism, the axiomatic. Now, under the previous 2 socia, the way that the world of production sort of was operant, what determined production was the earth and the despot. The way this was done and the way desire was manipulated was through codes. Desire fulfilled the needs of codes. Codes, desire interacted. Out came society. It's really fucking oversimplified. I'm not getting into it again. I'm just not. So fucking, that's the way that works. Instead, what I'm sort of aiming at today is, hey, what happened with capital? How are we sort of working? With capital, we make a move away from the setup that is focused on codes and overcoding to the axiomatic. Because capital only cares about the hyper quantification of things that it's related to. When we talk about that, the breaking down of the smallest bits, the tiniest parts, all those fun things. We move to a meaning system that isn't really symbols. With computers, for example, right now you're looking at me, taking me in, but the pieces that are actually what allow that, it's no longer the symbols of art or the codes and the signifiers that are sort of playing inside of a story, but instead much, much, much smaller pieces that we're cognitively aware of, making them up. In this case, specifically, we're aware of every pixel. As I move my hand, the pixel that is my finger becomes suddenly my lips. As I move, it becomes books behind me. Pixels are these fungible tiny bits. This is the case across everything in capital. Everything becomes this quantifiable, simplistic version of what it used to be, these tiny parts. As such, the way that codes operate necessarily can't come into this. They can't be imbued with meaning in the same way. Overcoding can't happen in the same way. So the way desire becomes manipulated is through the axiomatic. We've been spending 2 weeks on exactly what the axiomatic is at a basic level, what we've gotten to. And we're going to end up probably covering a decent amount of this today. So please feel free to yell at me that I'm spending too long on recovering this, but I'm really doing this for my own edification more than anything. The axiomatic operates like it does in set theory. A set is determined by a handful of, we'll say, rules. Rules is probably overstating it, has a lot of loaded language. Of axioms. When you have a set of numbers, you have a set of things, you have a whatever it may be. We'll start with numbers in calculus. The rules underneath them that enable that set to be called a set, or that condition the next items in a set, or the items that will be in there. This setup is conditioned by these axioms. There's some issues. Well, we'll take the example that we started with and that we keep coming back to, the way that a set may have numbers. And that's actually, I think, in this piece that I already have up. Let me go back a little bit because I think, is this the one that has it, or is it the other? No, this is. Yeah, this is actually, this isn't Summers Hall, this is Daniel Smith's. Summers Hall's is here. Yeah, this one's the Summer Hall version, which I think will give us a lot better run. So let's go back up to the example that they give. Right here in the middle. Peano's theory of arithmetic, the way arithmetic operates. And when I say arithmetic, it's the stuff I'm teaching my 6-year-old. It's the stuff that kids are learning in school. It's a base layer of things. There are 3 primitive terms assumed in this larger set. The series of natural numbers that comes with it. Again, think of it as first grade, kindergarten, teaching kids, Sesame Street, Electric Company, whatever the fuck kids are watching nowadays, whatever that is. We're talking about very base level stuff. So at first, we have the idea that 0 is a number. This is what enables the rest. We have the successor of a number is a number. Different numbers do not have the same successor. 0 is not the successor of any number. And if a property belongs to 0, and if, when it belongs to a given number, it belongs to the successor of that number, belongs to all numbers, the principle of induction that comes with it. Here are the 5 rules, the 5 propositions that build up how arithmetic can operate according to Peano and his theory. Basic layers. This enables 1 + 1 = 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all that fun stuff that we sort of take for granted. These rules, however, have a lot of issues. The way that they're set up, we can make sense of them, and we do, and we kind of run forward. The challenge is the way that the words themselves operate is they kind of are predicated on things outside of the set. This is one of the challenges with all sets, is the logic of a set, well, the logic of any system doesn't prove the system's truthness, it just proves its own internal consistency because it also is predicated on external elements. For example, 0 is a number. We understand 0 when we look at it as being the big goose egg, the conception of nothing, or 0 specifically as it's placed as 0, 0 on a grid. But 0 doesn't get defined in these rules. We could say 0 is 100, the number 100. This would completely fuck up everything, but it would be internally consistent to the set itself. This is the thing they have right below. As Russell points out, we give successor its usual meaning, but understand by 0 any given number, say 100, and by number each of the numbers starting from 100. The 5 axioms remain true together with, of course, all the theorems deducible from them. In the same way we could, by giving 0 its ordinary meaning, understand by numbers pairs of numbers only, and by successor the next but one after. Or again, with 0 standing, they're giving examples of how this sort of gets broken up. So the rules of the set, the axioms that condition it, aren't built itself. They're not sort of they're internally consistent, but they are predicated on secondary outside understandings. This is, at a base level, what we're talking about when we talk about axioms and the axiomatic inside of things. It's a matter of how we get about to solving problems. It's about how we come to solving them. And this is the thing I want to make sure we get back to, because this was basically where Daniel Smith went. It's the play of, yes, Pippa, exactly. It's definition through mathematical induction. Playing directly with sort of the logic of things, the axiomatic of things, as Deleuze calls it. And it's an important term for the way he talks about it. Now, a lot, isn't it? It's always fun. So this is where axiomatics conceptualize. But it's more important to understand, from what I'm able to tell, and from what people have yelled at me about in the various weeks we've been doing this, that it's not really about the axiomatic, it's more about how we understand it in terms of the juxtaposition for the problematic. Now, there's 2 ways we solve problems. And I'm going to actually pull up the secondary text here. This is Daniel Smith's writings on the axiomatic. I highly recommend pretty much anything Daniel Smith's ever written. But we're going to go ahead and ramble through this one. And then we're going to move on. We're going to be retreading stuff from last Wednesday, and then this Wednesday night, we're going to be doing it again. This is because I want to. Problematics versus axiomatics, historical background. Although Deleuze formulates the problematic axiomatic distinction in his own manner, it in fact reflects a fairly familiar tension within the history of mathematics, which can be illustrated by means of 3 historical examples. We're going to lightly go over them, and then we're going to move a little bit forward. And the first example comes from the Greeks. Proclus, in his commentary on the first book of Euclid's Elements, had already formulated a distinction within Greek geometry between problems and theorems. Theorems concern the demonstration, from axioms or postulates, of the inherent properties belonging to a figure, whereas problems concern the actual construction of figures, usually starting with a straightedge and compass. From this viewpoint, determining a triangle, the sum of whose angles is 180 degrees, is theorematic, since the angles of every triangle will total 180 degrees. By contrast, constructing an equilateral triangle on a given finite straight line is problematic, since we could also construct a non-equilateral triangle or a non-triangular figure on the line. Moreover, the construction of an equilateral triangle must first pass through the construction of 2 circles. If you haven't done it, you should. It's interesting. This is like 8th grade math in America when I was doing it. I don't know what grade it is now, but you should probably have done this at some point. Classical geometers struggled for centuries with three problems of antiquity: transecting an angle, constructing a square equal to a circle, and constructing a cube having double the volume of a given cube. Although only in 1882 it was proved that none of these problems was solvable using only a straight edge and compass. They were basically, they couldn't be done in the problematic style. They came from a different place. And here's the point. This is why theorematics and problematics involve two different conceptions of deduction. If in theorematics, a deduction moves from axioms to theorems, in problematics, a deduction moves from the problem to the ideal events that condition it and form the cases of solution that resolve it. Yes, people, I agree. It probably was first grade for ancient Greeks. Well, for some of them. Fascinating society. But I don't even know it. Do kids still use fucking compasses to do angles? I don't even know. In theorematics, for instance, a figure is defined statistically in Platonic fashion in terms of its essence and derived properties. Euclidean geometry defines the essence of the line in purely static terms that eliminate any reference to the curvilinear, a line which lies evenly with the points on itself. This is the definition of a line, how we define or say what a line is. Problematics found its expression in the operative geometry of Archimedes, in which the straight line is characterized dynamically as the shortest distance between 2 points. Here, the problem, how to construct a line, with its determinate conditions, has an infinite set of possible solutions. Curves, there's a million ways to do the thing, line between 2 points. The straight line is the case that constitutes the shortest solution. It's about how you're stating the problem, what the problem is, where it comes from, how it's set up. Similarly, the theory of conic sections, the ellipse, hyperbola, parabola, straight lines, and the point are all cases of the projection of a circle onto second planes in relation to the apex of a cone. This is, again, talking about the problematic, the way that we solve a problem or state a thing in terms of the solving of a problem rather than this sort of pre-idealized version. If Archimedean geometry can be said to be operative, is because it defines the line less as an essence than as a continuous operation or a process of alignment. The circle as a continuous process of rounding, the square as a process of quadrature, and so on. In problematics, a figure is defined dynamically by its capacity to be affected, that is, by the ideal accidents and events that can befall a figure. You can section it, cut, project, folding, bending, stretching, reflecting, rotating, and so on. Problematic. As a theorematic figure, a circle may indeed be an organic and fixed essence, but the morphological variations of the circle, figures that are lens-shaped, umbelliform, indented, form problematic figures that are vague yet rigorous, as Husserl said, essentially and not accidentally inexact. There's a shift here, again, sort of the lived in the world, actual thing that you're dealing with, and then sort of an idealized, ideal event version. So I'm reminded of a story my grandfather told me. He was a engineer, worked on the Titan projects, the space missile things. And they laid off all of the guys from his generation because the new recruits, new methods, these guys weren't good at computers and mathematics and all this stuff. And he ended up getting called back in because they couldn't figure out why these two pieces wouldn't fit, these two huge big cylinders of metal that make up the missile, why they couldn't fit. They couldn't get them to fit together. Mathematically, they were exact. They were machined perfectly. Everything was set up. They couldn't figure it out. So my grandfather goes in and he asks, oh, it was a big warehouse where they've got these two huge giant things on these fucking roll. He goes, have you always had the windows open? He's like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you've got all these giant windows on the one side open and the other side not. Why wouldn't, they're like, oh, well, just to let light in, blah, blah. He goes, no, the sunlight's making the metal heat up. Like, just the explanation of like, hey, the metal changes things when it's heated. It shifts the actual problematic nature of the thing versus the ideal case of the sort of set up pure math of it, where these collide. There's a lot of really fun stories like that. It's one that comes to mind for me. As we make our way through, and we talk about the problematic versus the axiomatic, which is really the core of this, he gives a handful of really great examples. Smith does. He's got the second one, the general tension between geometry itself and algebra and arithmetic on the other. This is not where we're going to spend time because it melted my brain on Wednesday. Deleuze goes over it a bit in Logic of Sense, which is pretty great. And we're not going to do that because it's Leibniz, and that's even worse. That's okay, though, because ultimately, really, we just need the first. The others are more complex versions of that first problem. So, to talk about the relation between problematics and axiomatics, with these historical examples in hand, we can now make several summary points concerning the relation between the problematic and the axiomatic poles of mathematics, or more broadly, the relation between minor and major science. This also pulls straight into what is philosophy. This is going to be pulling from a lot of stuff. First, according to Deleuze, mathematics is constantly producing notions that have an objectively problematic status. The role of axiomatics, its precursors, the theorematics, etc., is to codify, solidify these problematic notions, providing them with a theorematic ground or rigorous foundation. Axiomaticians, one might say, are the law and order types in mathematics. It's not unintentional that he's got those words in quotes. That's the whole point of the axiomatics. They're the law and order part of all of this. Hilbert and de Broglie were as much politicians as scientists. They reestablished order. What is philosophy? In this sense, as Jean Didon suggests, axiomatics is a foundational but secondary enterprise in mathematics, dependent for its very existence on problematics. In periods of expansion, when new notions are introduced, it is often very difficult to exactly delimit the conditions of their deployment. One must admit that one can only reasonably do so once one has acquired a rather long practice in these notions, which necessitates a more or less extended period of cultivation, during which incertitude and controversy dominates. We went over this on Wednesday. The term défrichement, cultivation is an interesting wording. It's correct here, but I think there's color lost in it a little bit. It's one of the challenges of English versus French. The period of cultivation is, think of it as overturning the soil. It's an overturning of the soil. Cultivation would be sort of setting the stage, testing, tearing things up, overturning things. There's like, it's a big giant, it's hard to describe if you don't know what it does, but when we overturn the soil, we basically tear up all the plant matter, animal matter, underground stuff, everything. We basically turn everything so that way the soil has a better chance, one, to breathe, but also it gives room for new seeds, gives room for water to pass through. It enables seeds to be planted, to take hold, and have life. And that's défrichement is really what's the term used for that process. It's really applicable here. It's the overturning, the constant churn. Once the heroic age of pioneers passes, the following generation can then codify their work, getting rid of the superfluous, solidifying bases, in short, putting the house in order. At this moment, the axiomatic method reigns anew until the next overturning that brings a new idea. Nicholas Bourbaki puts the point even more strongly, noting that, quote, the axiomatic method is nothing but the Taylor system, the scientific management of mathematics. Taylor system, cool history stuff, by the way, if you want to read up on it. But it was like trying to build a science of worker management, where they would, here's how long someone should work, here's where they should work, here's how you should be watching it. It's a lot of stuff that I would say spiritually has continued to today in how HR or companies manage workers. It's become very much more baked in. But the axiomatic method would be this. It's the management of mathematics, the scientific management of it. Deleuze adopted a similar historical thesis, noting that the push towards axiomatics at the end of the 19th century arose at the same time as Taylorism arose in capitalism. Axiomatic does for mathematics what Taylorism does for work. So far, this is clicking for me. All of this from what we've discussed the last 2 weeks. There is new shit. People come up with something that completely breaks stuff down and overturns everything that's happening. And this can happen in a lot of different ways. In specifically mathematics, someone will come up with, I think I sent it's in the chat somewhere, the people who figured out how to take a square and circle it, where they literally mathematically take the pieces out and figured out how to do it to an infinitesimal point, but has the same area, square and a circle having the same area. These things can be done. Someone figures out how to overturn. Some new shit comes around. This new shit necessarily begins that process of overturning. It churns the land. It gets rid of the old becomes fodder for the new. But at some point, that settles, seeds are planted, roots grow, it hardens, and now we have our crop. That crop is basically the axiomatic. You don't overturn the land again. The land doesn't get turned until you have another thing that comes along. Instead, that land is stuck. It is set. Oh, no, Pippa, scroll. I can post it. Someone did it. It's kind of amazing. There's a fight over it, I think would be the way I'd put it, because that's the way it works. When you have something new, there's a fight. Whether or not it's accurate or not, it's still a really good demonstration of this. Because it's at a base level. It completely undoes a lot of core understanding. Just it does. With that, people have to get the size of it. It becomes the four blind men in the room with the elephant. Was the one everyone's saying what the size of a thing is, wandering around, touching it, putting their hands on it, figuring things out, all of this fun stuff. That thing that happens over time solidifies into an understanding that can become axiomatized, that becomes the rules that are prescriptive rather than descriptive, that say, here's how things are done. Here is what a triangle is, rather than here's how you make a triangle. That change is something that I think is core to Deleuze's discussion about how capitalism operates and how we as subjects within capital are produced, that we make the process from the problematic to the axiomatic. You're going to make me find that link, aren't you? You really are. I'm gonna get it to you. Don't worry.
I think it's been approximated with varying degrees of accuracy.
I have the link. It's really cool.
Okay, I'll check it out.
If I can find it. We have a lot of goddamn people have been doing a lot of talking. We got readings. I keep forgetting we have so many readings in this fucking server. There it is. Yep, boop. We go there. And we go back there. To present.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia. It could be a translation thing. The term quadrature of the circle is sometimes used as a synonym for squaring. It may also refer to approximate or numerical methods for finding the area of a circle. It's generally considered impossible, I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah, well that's the part that's fun about it. I just reposted the link that has the. It's a piece from Quanta. Quanta is not like a weird whack job magazine, generally speaking.
I'll check it out. Thanks.
It's a fun read. At minimum, it's a fun read, whatever it may be. But underneath all of it, I would say it's almost the same point at the base. We're talking about the move from the problematic to the axiomatic. Now that the age of pioneers, things are totally different. Things are changing. People are trying new things. People are fighting with each other. There's crazy up here. Everything's wild. And then people get to work and they're building in it. They're playing in it. They're finding the edges. They do that. And then at some point, the house gets more and more in order because this is kind of how it has to work. We have to make sense of a thing. And as we make sense of it, we tell each other how to make sense of it. We explain it so other people can move on to the next thing. And then at this setup, we begin moving towards the axiomatizing of things. This setup within mathematics is not going to be wildly different from almost anything else having to do with desire or anything else in capital. But we'll get to it. And Zenico, if I don't think quanta has problems, I feel free to let me know if anyone has issues with quanta, because I'm always looking for like good sources for things that I can read because it's getting slim. So if you have any other good journals or things that are kind of fun online stuff that is entertaining, because I don't do social media anymore. So fun. Second, problematic concepts often, though not always, have their source in what Deleuze terms the ambulatory sciences. Sciences such as metallurgy, surveying, stone cutting, and perspective. One need only think of the mathematical problems encountered by Archimedes in his work in military installations, Desargues on the techniques of perspective, Monge on the transportation of the earth, and so on. The nature of such domains, however, is that they do not allow science to assume an autonomous power. The reason, according to Deleuze, is that the ambulatory sciences, quote, subordinate all their operations to the sensible conditions of intuition and construction, following the flow of matter, drawing and linking up smooth space. Everything is situated in the objective zone of fluctuation that is coextensive with reality itself, however refined or rigorous. Approximate knowledge is still dependent upon sensitive and sensible evaluations that pose more problems than they solve. Problematics is still its only mode. 373 Deleuze and DG 1978. That's got to be Anti-Oedipus. Expected. Do I know that quote? I mean, 1,000 Plateaus, sorry. Let's go finding on a source and see what we can find. Because, like, so 1987 is tough. What would that be in? It is 1,000 Plateaus. 1,000 Plateaus, was it published in 1987? My brain breaks sometimes. I feel like that was not the year, but maybe it was the year. I'm confused. Whatever. That's fine. Let's find out exactly where this is. And we go here, we go 1,000 Plateaus. All right, let's see. $395, which is the War Machine, where all this comes in. Now let's find it in the French. One sec, sorry everyone. I promise I'm more entertaining generally. Let's do Plateau. Okay. So, got you here. Find out where this goes. Let's see. Ambulant sciences are more saturated with irrational procedures, mystery, and magic. They only get that way when they follow into obeyance. Royal sciences, yeah, just translation of all of this. I know people like Masumi, but there's just odd places of odd choices of where commas go that changes meanings, all that fun stuff. Okay, that's This is gonna be fun. War machine, war machine, war machine. Let's see. What's something that we can pull from? Ce n'est pas la science ambulance. Doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doo. Apologies, it'll just be another second. Having issues. There it is. It's gonna be interesting. So the translation, yeah, they have mystery and magic, which I like. Okay. Flux of matter. I just, everything, when it's translated, just loses so much. It is not that the itinerant, interesting translation for that. Ambulant, yeah. The ambient sciences are more imbued with irrational approaches. Mastery magic, they only become so when they fall into they fall into disuse. Interesting. They only get that when they fall into abeyance. See, it's such a loaded word to throw in there. He doesn't have that in there. I will do this another time because I fucking can't help myself these days. The big thing I wanted to check is that it's not flow of matter. It's not courant, it's flux. It's flux because he literally goes on to talk about the zone of fluctuation. The difference between these things is kind of significant, especially when we're talking about the mathematics of it, which Deleuze does not want us to shy away from. This is not the flow of a thing and then over here we have math. All of it comes from the same place, desire, and the flux of desire, the flux of capital is the zone of fluctuation coextensive with reality itself, and fluctuation is intentionally used there. He doesn't shy away from any of that, to be perfectly frank. He shies away from, I would say, none of that. And so it's really important to not make that move that they make, which I find frustrating. And I always have. It's every time I get into this. It's just an odd set of choices. An odd set of choices for translating things. Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop. So the ambulatory sciences, which they have a handful of practical sciences, we could also say, I think. Ambulatory is an odd word for this, and it can be translated, I think, a lot of different ways. I was trying to see what ways that, if the French have weird uses for it, but they don't seem to, that I can tell. Science ambulance soins plats, pénétrer des marches. I don't pronounce anything well, I don't care, because I'm mostly just trying to say it out loud so I can read it. It's fine, we'll keep moving. The following the flux of matter, drawing and linking up smooth space. Everything is situated in the objective zone of fluctuation, which is, I'm actually going to have to look that because that doesn't sound right. The zone of fluctuation is often, he originally writes that usually in fluxion, zone of fluxion, which sounds weirder, but it's, again, the tense and the use of it is, yeah, fuck. I need to stop doing this on stream. That's fine. Ultimately, the ambulatory sciences, the practical sciences, as they're making the move, as they're talking about here inside of 1,000 Plateaus, is a push towards this sort of very practical, you could say, problem-solving space. They've got actual earth to survey. They've got actual buildings to build. They've got rock to cut. They've got material to understand. They're dealing with much more practical, specific things and moving their way up from that. That thing that's happening, this is the sort of play that they're talking about. And ultimately, problematics has its only mode, as they say. Such sciences are linked to notions, such as heterogeneity, dynamism, continuous variation, flux, and so on, that are barred or banned from the requirements of axiomatics, and consequently they tend to appear in history as that which was superseded or left behind. By contrast, what is proper to royal science, which is a particular term in the sciences, to its theorematic or axiomatic power is, quote, to isolate all operations from the conditions of intuition, making them true intrinsic concepts or categories. Without this categorical apodictic apparatus, the differential operations would be constrained to follow the evolution of a phenomenon. Basically, think of it as a hyperactualization of the things that have been learned and hardened and put into place, because we can't have the dynamism of the oddness, of the incorrectness, or the color around it. We have to get to a point where a thing can be known, categorized, placed. In the ontological field of interaction between minor and major science, in other words, quote, the ambulant sciences confine themselves to inventing problems whose solution is tied to a whole set of collective, non-scientific activities, but whose scientific solution depends, on the contrary, on royal science, and the way it has transformed the problem by introducing it into its theorematic apparatus and its organization of work. This is somewhat like intuition and intelligence in Bergson, where only intelligence has a scientific means to solve formally the problems posed by intuition. Actually, very much what Bergson was talking about between the two. Highly recommend Bergsonism. Highly recommend Bergson in general. I'm not going to necessarily get super deep into how he talked about, but for Bergson, intuition isn't just like some silly thing like, oh, I see the future, nothing like that, but instead sort of the immediate grasp we have of things, how we take it in and sort of take the thing not really for as it is. There's more complex things. It's not that there's an objective reality of a thing and we're taking it for what it is and we're able to see past some illusory ideologic sort of veil that's placed. Instead, it's just as we take it in those first moments, the ability for us to intuitively understand stuff, versus intelligence, which is the you could say more abstracted sort of secondary understanding once we have a grasp of the size of the thing, what it can be done, how big is it, where it can go, how it fits into the world, what it's connected to. This becomes intelligence, and this is the scientific means of solving the formal problems posed by intuition. And again, this process of, this is literally just, is this just Bergson? Is this just going to be fucking Bergson again? Third, what is crucial in the interaction between the two poles are thus the process of translation that take place between them. For instance, in Descartes and Fermat, an algebraic translation of the geometrical. In Weierstrass, a static translation of the dynamic. In Dedekind, there's no way I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I am, that's an awesome name. Who the fuck is Dedekind? Let's learn a new thing today. Someone probably already knows and is just going to be like, oh, Dedekind is X, Y, and Z. Richard Diddy, oh, it's German, so it's probably pronounced Didikand. Didikand. That's terrible. A German mathematician who made important contributions to number theory, abstract algebra, and axiomatic foundations of arithmetic. Jesus Christ. Of course. What was his thing? He defined two sets to be similar when there exists a one-to-one correspondence between them. He invokes similarity to give the first precise definition of an infinite set. A set is infinite when it is similar to a proper part of itself. In modern terminology, is equinumerous to one of its proper subsets. Thus, the n of natural numbers can be shown to be similar to the subset of n whose members are the squares of every number. They're similar. Yeah, it's a precursor to Cantor, it looks like. Yeah, fair. Yeah, I mean, he kind of did a whole bunch of amazing shit. Really foundational. I love finding people like that. All right. The richness and necessity of translations, writes Deleuze, include as many opportunities for openings as risks of closure or stoppage. This is War Machine again. In general, Deleuze's work in mathematical epistemology tends to focus on the reduction of the problematic to the axiomatic, the intensive to the extensive, the continuous to the discrete, the non-metric to the metric, the non-denumerable to the denumerable, the rhizomatic to the arborescent, the smooth to the striated. Not all these reductions, to be sure, are equivalent, and Deleuze, following Lautmann, analyzes each on its own account. Deleuze himself highlights two of them. All right, here they are. The first is the complexity of the means by which one translates intensities into extensive quantities, or, more generally, multiplicities of distance into systems of magnitude that measure and striate them. The role of logarithms in this connection. Okay, let's find that. That is 100% War Machine. Has to be. Yep. Yeah, smooth and striated. Fuck. I really hate going over 1,000 Plateaus. 1,000 Plateaus is a phenomenal book, and I recommend it to everybody. I always have, I always will. I don't believe a reading of 1,000 Plateaus is productive. I believe it helps to talk to other people as you're reading, to research, to go where you go. But if you are going to listen to someone tell you what 1,000 Plateaus means, you fucked up. That's like the opposite of the point. It's like the opposite of the point. So don't do that. Don't even listen to me. In fact, tune out. Fucking I'm worthless. Don't do this. But for now, I'm going to maybe break my own rule as I talk through this for a second. Okay. Let's move you into... Yeah, do I want to... Yeah, why not? Let's take a look at a section here. Because these are the two examples given by Daniel Smith, and he knows his shit more than me. ATP. Okay, and it's going to be this. Yep, and you guys get to see all of that. Isn't that fun? All right, let's slide you in. Okay. We'll leave the top of the page and pull in the bottom so we can at least get most of it on screen. And let's see what we got here. All right. Smooth and striated. I'm just going to read the paragraph and I'm just going to talk about how I understand it. Do not take what I'm saying as the understanding of this paragraph or how this is meant to be taken. I am working through this. You're just going to be along for the fucking journey. We are always, however, brought back to a dissymmetrical necessity to cross from the smooth to the striated, from the striated to the smooth. These are the two sides of really the pole we're talking about, the problematic to the axiomatic, the quantified to the non-quantified, the extensive to the intensive. If it is true, the itinerant geometry and the nomadic number of smooth spaces are a constant inspiration to royal science and striated space. Conversely, the metrics of striated spaces is indispensable for the translation of the strange data of the smooth multiplicity. Translating is not a simple act. It is not enough to substitute a space traversed for the movement. A series of rich and complex operations is necessary. Bergson was the first to make this point. Translating between the two is not simply a one-to-one. Instead, it's incredibly complex. It takes a lot more work for us to understand and be able to speak to the smooth striated, the unquantified, the intensive, through the terms of the extensive, the two poles we're talking about. Neither is translating a secondary act. It is an operation that undoubtedly consists in subjugating, overcoding, metricizing smooth space. I was particularly using a lot of specific terms here. Subjugation is it's that word. That's probably the original. Overcoding is a master signifier to signifier. This is the reigning power of control of things. Metricizing is the measurement to an exactness that's relatable to everything else, the making of it being metric. It's not a hard fucking word. I'm just saying it out loud. In neutralizing smooth space, the intensive elements, but also in giving it a milieu of propagation, extension, refraction, renewal, and impulse, without which it would perhaps die of its own accord, like a mask without which it could neither breathe nor find a general form of expression. Major science has a perpetual need for the inspiration of the minor, but the minor would be nothing if it did not confront and conform to the highest scientific requirements. Let's take two examples of the richness. These are the two examples that Daniel Smith goes over. We're going to go through each one. First, the complexity of the means. Get rid of that search function right there, and that fucked up the screen. Well done. Good job, Brooks. You're just kicking ass today. That's fine. We'll just deal with it. First, the complexity of the means by which one translate intensities into extensive quantities, or more generally, multiplicities of distance into systems of magnitudes that measure and striate them. The role of logarithms in this connection. The complexity of the means by which one translates intensities into extensive quantities. That alone is, yes, that's the whole point of translation. Okay, so, but what's the point here? Two examples, the richness and necessity of translations, which include opportunities for opening as risks of closure or stoppage. We have intensities needing to be translated to extensive quantities, or more generally, multiplicities of distance into systems of magnitude that measure and striate them. Yeah, that actually might just be just simply the words that are there. The role of logarithms. Logarithmic graphing as a thing, sure. Necessarily, as you get to different magnitudes, you can't simply use the same axis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We use logarithmic scales in order to sort of talk about and explain exponential growth of a thing. Everyone was probably familiar with this during the vid when it was happening, when people were looking at the numbers of infections, numbers of this. Now, when there's exponential categories, you don't just do normal measurements. It's not one-to-one. This is the movement away from the intensive to the extensive quantification, the multiplicity, magnitudes. Second, more important, thank you, the delicacy and complexity means of which Riemann patches of smooth space receive a Euclidean conjunction. Fucking Christ. This is going to be a thing. All right. If anyone wants to come on and explain Riemann geometry to me simply, this is going to be a whole thing. because I've already gone through this because it fucking sucks for video games. Like, geometry is a fascinating thing, and I have smarter people around me who send me stuff, and I'm too stupid to understand, generally. Because it's just...
All right, let me try and take a crack at this.
Hey, I know that lovely, lovely voice. Please do.
So you can imagine that there is a number scale from 0 to 1 to infinity. And you assume that the distances are uniform in the integer expressions. But when you look at the number scale moving from Euclidean distance, as in to say the units are themselves unitary, towards Riemann space, which is where you're looking at the logarithmic relations, you can make the relation that the distance between 1 and 10 is the same as the distance between 10 and 100. So that means that a lot of curves that you see in Euclidean space turn into lines in Riemann space.
Because the relationship between them kind of flattens differences. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, it just fucks with the way that, yeah, I mean, it flattens differences because of magnitude.
Indeed. So, I mean, to make this immediately sensational.
That's literally, by the way, that's a really good way to explain this shit. So I'm going to, like, just so you know, that's really good. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead then. Yeah, take it away.
No, please go. Like, a thing clicked for me that I didn't have before, because now I understand why it's called manifold geometry. It makes sense to me suddenly.
Yeah, just imagine looking out of your eyes, but then clocking in between distances of space that register as linear or logarithmic. You would be able to see a huge amount of distance. You'll be able to see the curvature of the Earth, not as like a round object, but as a singularity moving outward. It kind of sounds strange, and it sounds as if I'm engaging in some, crystal mommy Google nonsense. But the point is that the change in relations between unitary factors linearizes as their supposed distances approach logarithmic relations.
I posted a picture from the Wikipedia, which I think does a lovely job actually of talking about what you're saying, because this is fascinating. So this then is based on, again, there's a lot of terms being used here, and feel free to tell me where I'm fucking stupid. Genuinely, please do. A lot of terms we've been using in the last like 20, 30 minutes. Manifold, exponential, logarithmic, that is playing with basically the scale of things and the nature of that scale and how it shifts sort of our grasp of what's happening or the perception of it. So with manifold geometry, Riemann geometry versus Euclidean geometry, everything is very much graphed out really one-to-one in its most perfect tiny little bits, every little thing. It's why we end up with curved spaces. It's why we end up with curves in general, because it's always a curve. A curve is just a bunch of little dots, a bunch of points in Euclidean geometry. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And so we end up with curves because every point is a point. But with Riemann geometry, with Riemann manifold geometry, because we're dealing with shifting of scales in terms of the differential of things, suddenly what was a curve no longer is, and now what's a curve is a whole different fucking beast. Like, it's a completely different thing that has completely different meaning inside of this way of defining the element. Am I off in that, you think?
Yeah, I mean, that the image that you posted is actually very good. I didn't even expect something that could be so succinct. So you're looking at basically a projection from a point, and you can imagine that those two arrows are like the vectors of someone's eyeballs, and this person needs to take into account like not only what they're trying to look at, as in to say like how far in the distance they want to go, but also to measure the distance between the projected imaginary lines out of their eye.
This is really interesting because the phrasing and the angle he's talking about, I'm just going to restate that. The delicacy and complexity of the means by which Riemannian, that's a terrible fucking word. Riemannian, so God, I'm not going to be able to say that. Riemann patches of smooth space receive Euclidean conjunction, the role of the parallelism of vectors in striding the infinitesimal. This is Riemannian patches of smooth space.
Yeah.
So the Riemannian patches of smooth space, when we're
right,
talking, sorry, I'm trying to. You can't see me because I'm stumbling over myself, which I don't do a lot, but I'm doing it here. The Riemannian patches of smooth space are, when they're translated to Euclidean, basically we're breaking up what was almost, I don't want to say perspective, but I'm going to sort of say that the way that we were looking at things was in terms of the differential, the sort of scale of things wasn't as important for us to break down into the tiny bits. But when we make that move to the Euclidean conjunction, we're turning the smooth spaces into very, very, very defined curves. Would that be accurate to say?
I want to step back from the idea that there's anything different between a curve and a line. To a mathematician, they're the same thing.
In Euclidean or Riemann geometry, they are, well, I guess they would be the same thing, but when we're converting one to the other, and that translation is what he's talking about, moving from a perfectly straight line in Riemannian mathematics or geometry to Euclidean, could end up being deeply the translation isn't quite just saying a line, right? Like there's no one-to-one there in the same way, is there? Because that's the phrase he's using that I find interesting, because he's talking about the richness and necessity of translations, which include as many opportunities for openings as risks of closure or stoppage. The delicacy and complexity of the means by which, I'm going to read a little bit further, the delicacy and complexity of the means by which Riemannian patches of smooth space receive a Euclidean conjunction, the role of the parallelism of vectors in striating the infinitesimal. The mode of connection proper to patches of Riemannian space, the accumulation, is not to be confused with the Euclidean conjunction of Riemann space, the parallelism, yet the two are linked and give each other impetus. Nothing is ever done with. Smooth space allows... Wait. Sorry. Sorry. This is my brain just shit out on me. Where was I? Sorry, 2 seconds. Apologies. I'm trying to figure out where I was. The PDF jumped pages, which I fucking hate when it does that so much. Okay. Right here in the middle. Apologies. Try it again. The mode of connection proper to patches of Riemannian space accumulation is not to be confused with the Euclidean conjunction of Riemann space, parallelism. Yet the two are linked and give each other impetus. Nothing is ever done with. Smooth space allows itself to be striated. Striated space reimparts a smooth space. This is what you mean when you... Okay, so when you say, don't think of it as a line and a curve, think of it as they're speaking of the same thing. There is only that thing. Okay. Like both work. Is this basically what you're saying? No? Am I too
Keep
stupid?
reading, you might get it.
Okay. Is it possible to give a very general mathematical definition of smooth spaces? Mandelbrot's fractals seem to be on that path. Fractals are aggregates whose number of dimensions is fractional rather than whole, or else whole but with continuous variation in any direction. Go make fractals. They're really cool. Shadertoy.com. There's a bunch of really cool fractals you can play with. Fractals are aggregates whose numbers of dimensions is fractional rather than whole, or else whole, but with continuous variation in direction. An example would be a line segment, whose central third is replaced by the angle of an equilateral triangle. The operation is repeated for the 4 resulting segments, so on ad infinitum, following a relation of similarity. Such a segment would constitute an infinite line or curve with a dimension greater than 1, but less than a surface. I don't think I've ever understood this part of this book ever before. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. So, on a fractal, as an example, the line it's a line until we get small enough, but even as we get small enough, it's continually still the line. It's broken up. There's parts of it. There's an almost infinite number of regressive parts to that line, but it is still a line. Even though it's not a line. Oh, God damn it.
So I think the important part about Mandelbrot, him bringing up Mandelbrot, is that Mandelbrot's fractal is a specific, I think it's a specific case of a Julian fractal, where the variabilized convergence is whether or not the equation converges to 2 or below 2, right? So I forget what is it, x squared plus c? I can't remember the exact formula.
Something like that. Yeah, there's some, it's some very weirdly simple thing to do it, but yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And you can draw a circle around Mandelbrot's fractal, and you'll basically see that the what do you call them? The extreme parts, right? So you know how you have on the right there's a chordoid, right? So the Bunyan kind of thing that goes infinitely faster into 0, and on the left there's this sort of weird, sort of triangular, but also like a weird infinite series of shapes, and then further to the left there's the island, right? So these actually configure quite nicely to a circle around the origin, but that's only because a circle with a radius 2.
Well, the examples they give literally on the page, the Sierpinski's sponge and Van Koch's curve. I'm just going to read the examples and then we'll continue this because I think they fit very much what you're saying. The curve, if you're looking at the screen, I need to share my screen to the Discord. That probably would help, stupid ass me. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen. This is going to be fucking terrible. But apologies.
And by the way, this is neatly tied to what we were talking about last week, where the person was trying to fit a square into a circle. Yes.
This shit is coming together in my head. I really like this and appreciate it, by the way. So sharing the screen, Van Koch's curve, more than a line, less than a surface. The middle third of the segment, AE, again, so we're measuring A, C, and E. There's the line with the 3 points. And AE is removed and replaced with the triangle BCD. We remove C, we replace it. This operation is repeated separately for every segment thereon. You basically add between every single set of 2 points. You find the middle, add another triangle, bump, boom, do it again, and do it on every surface that exists. This is Van Koch's curve. Really fascinating because it does this really strange thing. As it goes, you'll see it right here. It's fractal-ish, and I think it fits here. This yields an angled line of equal segments and so on ad infinitum. The end result is a curve composed of an infinite number of angled points that preclude any tangent being drawn to any of their points. The length of the curve is infinite, and its dimension is higher than 1. It represents a space of 1 point, blah, blah, blah dimensions, log 4, log 3, which is crazy complex math, but the short version is it's not just the simple Euclidean curve. It's not, which is thing I did with a protractor and a fucking compass in 4th grade. This setup is very different. And the Sierpinski sponge on the right there, more than a surface, less than a volume. The law according to which this cube was hollowed can be understood intuitively at a glance. Each square hole is surrounded by 8 holes, a third its size. These holes are in turn surrounded each by 8 holes, also a third their size, and so on endlessly. The illustrator could not represent the infinity of holes of decreasing size beyond the 4th degree, but it's plain to see this cube is, in the end, infinitely hollow. Its total volume approaches 0, while the total surface of the hollowings infinitely grows. The space has a dimension of 2.7 blah blah. It's going to be some other low number fucking shit. It therefore lies between a surface with a dimension of 2 and a volume with a dimension of 3. But it's not really either. It's not a cube. It's not a cube. It's also not hollow, but it totally is. But it's not. But it's approaching hollow. But it's also got infinite surface, so can't ever really be like just completely fucks with. Yeah. Oh Jesus. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Apologies for interrupting. Just this is fascinating. Yeah. Thank you, Deblo. That's just crazy.
Don't be afraid to like slow down though.
Are you kidding? I do so much coke before these meetings. No, I'm just kidding. No, please. Help me slow down.
Yeah, so I mean, the way that I try and absorb, massive material that has hidden poetry inside of it is that I remember that human beings really aren't bipedal. We actually have 3 legs, as in to say, sure, we get around with 2, but then when we fall, we use an additional limb to get up. I don't know of a person who just gets, maybe like Jackie Chan or some sort of karate master gets up only with his legs when he's down.
Right.
But the point is that the mind probably works in the same way. We need 3 points of contact to stay stable at any given time. Now, 2 of them must be at least explicit. And when you're reading something that seems like almost extremely difficult to take in, try and make 2 points of contact with something that you already are familiar with. That's why in some sense he's kind of calling it an ambulatory science, but in a person's mind you think, wait, is it walking? Actually, he's just saying that it has a metered adjacency to what we have already established.
Yes, Estelle, we're all trying to be more mature than I am. We're trying to be more mature than myself. And I did giggle a little bit because I am fucking 9 years old. But yeah, no, it's because I think the point you're getting at is the underlying of this, that the categorization, axiomatization of what it defines a human as, or what bipedal means, or how we're bipedal, like these things, versus the what Deleuze would call the problematic, and the translation between them, that we're able to make do, like we're able to have both be accurate. I can say very clearly, oh yeah, well, human beings are bipedal. But when you say that we have a third leg, there's like 9 meanings of it that 100% work for me, and that I agree in every single way. But I wouldn't say there's like a trinary leg creature. We're not tripedal. Like the way that these things become quantified or made exact or made axiomatized is, I think, the underlying point. And the fractals are a really interesting example of that. And that makes a lot. So please.
Just to make sure that you're, Fonkoch would be, well, I mean, it could be pretty hard for you to pronounce it, but for the fractal, the curve, von Koch's curve.
Okay, so I see that you're making a third leg comment.
No, I mean, I'm getting away from the thing. I'm making it so that you can't really misunderstand it for the other pronunciation.
I am going to mispronounce it because we have 2 ways of pronouncing Koch here in the States. It's awful. So we have and we all know it's the Koch brothers. Coke. It's Coke, or it's cock, because that's how we sort of got the German version made its way here. So there's Koch Industries, and then there's the Koch brothers, those two. And again, we pronounce anything however the fuck we pronounce it. It sucks.
He was Swedish, so maybe the pronunciation isn't exactly the same, but I'd say have you Loch Ness Monster?
I see that's Scottish, and I loch.
Yeah, that's hard to pronounce when you're not used to it.
Fair enough. Good to know. So, okay. So in ATP they have the line, just to continue this little bit here. Similar results can be obtained by making holes by cutting windows into a circle instead of by adding points to a triangle. Likewise, a cube into which holes are drilled according to principle of similarity becomes less than a volume but more than a surface, as the example of Sierpinski's sponge says. This is mathematical presentation of the affinity between a free space and a holy space. I really hope that fucking line is in there in the original. I know it's not, but I like the idea of free space and holy space as being a really clever turn of phrase. In other forms, Brownian motion, turbulence, and the sky are fractals of this kind. Perhaps this provides us with another way of defining fuzzy aggregates, but the main thing is that it provides a general determination for smooth space that takes into account its differences from and relations to striated space. We shall call striated or metric any aggregate with a whole number of dimensions, and for which it is possible to assign constant directions. 2. Non-metric smooth space is constituted by the construction of a line with a fractional number of dimensions greater than 1, or of a surface with a fractional number of dimensions greater than 2. 3. A fractional number of dimensions is the index of a properly directional space with continuous variations in direction without tangent. 4. What defines a smooth space, then, is that it does not have a dimension higher than that which moves through it or is inscribed in it. In this sense, it is a flat multiplicity, for example, a line that fills a plane without ceasing to be a line. 5. Space and that which occupies space tends to become identified, to have the same power in the inexact. That cannot be the fucking translation. The inexact yet rigorous form of the numbering or non-whole number, occupy without counting. 6. A smooth amorphous space of this kind is constituted by an accumulation of proximities, and each accumulation defines a zone of indiscernibility proper to becoming. More than a line, less than a surface, less than a volume, and more than a surface.
Inexact is actually the word the author's using.
It is. I have it up next to it. It is. So, okay. That's fascinating. So now inexact is not the word. Inexact, just to be a fucking weirdo with semantics. If I were to say something's inexact, it means it's not exact. It's specifically that, like, you would say things are exact or inexact. Anexact would be separated from that discussion entirely. It's without exactness.
Yeah. You can think of like a computer then calculating and giving you the result that you got is 0.000001. And you think, oh, that's not exact, but it's inexact.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And it's important as shit when we're talking about the way that we were discussing mathematically log 2, log 3, for example, when we're talking about Van Gogh's curve, where we're talking about it represents a space of 1.261859 dimensions, log 4, log 3, exactly. There's an inexactness that he's mentioning and bringing in, which is fucking fascinating. Inexact yet
I'll be
rigorous
honest.
form.
I mean, nobody really, even today, like I don't really read philosophers who use vocabulary in this kind of manner.
Oh,
not at least,
no.
at least not frequently.
No, it's really Simondon. I'm going to just say Simondon. Bergson touches into it, but he had a background in mathematics, so it's like that was his thing. He was a mathematician, so like he plays in it. But I'd be hard pressed the way Deleuze just dives in. But it's also because it's tough. I think Deleuze, as I sort of talked about the first day we started going through this, the reason he's bringing mathematics in is not to like make an allegorical point. There's no allegory in Anti-Oedipus or 1,000 Plateaus. It's not really his thing. Instead, there's a universal history of things because of the way that thought operates, the image of thought and the process of thought that works and how it's changed over time is to him the point. And because of that, then the image of thought of what we would say and categorize as mathematics or science or linguistics or politics or social order or whatever, like law or anything, all of these things, well, having discrete categorization, that's more on the after part. He wants to get to the universal side of things. So when we talk about this, he's really, all of everything is in this. He's talking about this universal history of how things operate, how we understand stuff, how things come together and how things work. Not, oh, yes, no, this is how candle making operates, is you build candles with axiomatics. Like that's not the point. It's the image of thought operates across multiple fields. And so when he's talking about like how a major science, and in specifically this case, we're talking about like how a major science, the royal sciences, rely on minor science. And minor science, he doesn't mean like small guys. He doesn't mean the small thing. He means the sort of overturning weird shit that people are playing with at the fringes. What once was fringe, quantum computing, for example. Or probably even weirder shit happening now that I'm not super familiar with. But those minor sciences, that is where people go, hey, we saw a thing. There's this weird thing. Oh, let's figure out that weird thing. And then they're trying to figure it out. And then over time, it gets translated to a thing. And it's no longer a weird thing. Now it's a known thing. It's axiomatized. This process is how thought works in our space. And so that thing that he's talking about here, he's bringing in mathematics because, I mean, frankly, it's kind of, to me, a genius move, because when we're talking about how capital breaks everything down into quantification and quantity, I mean, this is, and Marx talked about, like, this is the point of Marx at a basic level. New version of Capital is out on shelves now. Go out, kids, buy Capital. When he talks about sort of the movement from commodity to money, commodity, money, commodity, or money, commodity, money, the shift between the two, it changes our relationship with the world. Prior to this, I'd build a table and it would be converted to some sort of marketable 12 gold coins or whatever the fuck, and then I would use those gold coins to buy an ox or some other shit, and then I'd go about my day. But once we made the move to start with money, I have $1,000. What do? Well, I want to make more money, so I'm going to buy your pizza shop. I'm going to buy an ox. I'm going to buy 10 oxen, and I'm going to pay some other guy to work, so I have excess capital. So it becomes money, commodity, money, commodity, money, commodity, money, commodity, money, commodity, money, and it never ends. There's no consumption moment in the process for that, not in the same way as it used to be. And this movement means that everything necessarily has to be quantified. And in Capital, everything's turned into base numbers. But numbers are not all created equal. It's the Suzanne de Brunoff, through Marx, talks extensively, Marx on Money, wonderful book, talks extensively about how money, commodity, currency, and capital are not the same thing. And here's why I'm bringing it back to this. Capital exists in a different stratum. She talks about it in terms of magnitude, the way that it operates. Someone who has $1 billion or me with my $1,000, I get my paycheck for $1,000. Yay. And Elon Musk gets $80 billion. The idea that these two are measured the same is silly. It's a silly thing that we do, in the same way that my body temperature is 96.7 degrees and the sun is 1.4 million degrees or 10 billion or whatever the fuck. Like, we measure them the same, but it's almost silly the way that we do, because we're talking about logarithmic exponential growth of difference. And so at those different levels, things operate differently. They look differently. They work differently. Susan Brunoff, wonderful book. And so Deleuze is taking that through this to another level, where he's like, well, look, if this is the case, we need to understand how we make the move and how we are able to, because it's not like we don't have the ability to conceptualize or think of money as being the same on both cases. It's my $1,000 and Elon Musk. Like, that we have that. We have this exact tiny bit, but at the same time, we're able to make a move in a different way and understand things at that large scale in a completely different way. And these two versions of things is really important to understanding how deeply fucked capitalism is from a like monetary perspective. But it ends up sort of falling back on everything, that everything goes through this, that we have these tiny bits of things that are kind of unknown, that are the logarithmic, problematic, weird, fuzzy things that over time we define, collapse, and push into being, oh, here, everything's down to its tiniest bits. Now, this is how you get to the 80 billion and $1 being the same unit. We need the smallest unit to define everything, even though it's not really how it works at an intensive level or an actualized or a specific level. Logarithmic. What did I say? Did I fuck up the word? Did I fuck up the word? I fucked up the word, didn't I? God damn it. But anyway, that's my ramble. And so I think that's how, I mean, that's how we tie it back.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
I think it's actually important that you said that the units of measure, the way that we have units of measure that equivocate, scales that are so vastly different, is kind of the point to how sociology and economy relate to the mathematics, right? The math says that, look, you can't even, when you're trying to look into Euclidean space, you cannot even vantage towards how that relates to Riemann space, because you have to fill in like these vacuums and holes that exist with a series of dots, with lines that never meet, yet somehow they make volume. And in the same way, like I can't imagine having the wealth of Bezos in the exact same manner.
Mm-hmm. And it's the founder of Steam still has one of my favorite lines. Gabe Newell. Someone asked him how it feels to have like $6 billion, and he's like, "It's not really how it works." He's like, "You're more a filter that $6 billion is passing through." I always love that, because it is such a different existence, a different understanding. And he talks about it. He does like a little ramble that fits exactly what we're talking about, that his thing is less, oh, I'm going to spend $50 here or $100 there, like the way we budget and we subtract out of our monthly budget. Oh, I only have $3,000, so I've got to, it's instead literally looking at curves. They look at curves, growth rates. You have 2% growth over this, 5%. It's a completely different way of understanding wealth and money in every single way when you have that level of it, period. Noah asks, why is striation silly? You may have to take me back to what I was talking about when I said that, if I'm the one who said it. Noah, so if you want to unmute and rant and yell at me.
I just think in this section, it's like we shouldn't view like striation as like particularly silly, and smoothness as not
I don't know if I was saying so. If I said
Euclidean and Riemannian space, it's not like they're two spaces on like different planes, right? It's just like two perspectives of viewing space, right? And that's like,
well, I think that's, if I'm saying anything silly, and Dublo, please tell me if you disagree or anyone disagrees. To me, actually, the point you're making is the point, that it's it's the way that we tend to think of them as only being one or the other, or two separate things. That is the silly, probably was more what I was meaning. It's silly to consider the $80 billion that Elon Musk has in the same way that I consider my $1,000 I have in my pocket, that I'm able to go buy some books. It's not how he handles things. And people do this, and I mean this. People talk about the wealthy like, well, they just go buy a house and pay cash. They go do this. It's not really how their existence works. It's to presume it's identical is the folly. And I think that's part of the whole thing, is that you can't regard Riemann space and Euclidean space as the same thing. There is the same, underneath, like, they are talking about the same thing. They're not like different worlds, or we're living in two dimensions, like the TV show Fringe. Probably too old of a reference for many people in here. Good TV show. But like, instead, that they are two modalities for the same sort of underlying reality or understandings of it. And to understand that there's the two sides, you need to understand the sides, I guess would be the way to put it. And that there is the two poles. Here's the process. Here's how they relate. Here's where they come together. That would be probably where my brain would say as a thing. That's kind of my ramble.
Yeah, you're exactly right on that question.
I don't take silly to mean something that's negative. I take silly to mean requiring an extreme abstraction. Like, it's easier for me to understand Alice growing from eating a mushroom than to say that, oh, if I work hard, I'll be Bezos.
Yeah, actually, that's probably a fair way to put it too. Go for it, Noah.
No, yeah, I'm picking up what you're laying down. I mean, that's why, like, they bring up that question of like logarithms and exponents, because you can translate space, like going from smooth to striated or striated to smooth, right? So it's like, I see what you're saying. So you're saying like it is silly to view space as solely striated, right? In the same way that like Zeno and Zeno's paradox says, movement doesn't exist because he's only looking at space from a striated manner. And there's a footnote in that section about Achilles and the tortoise that D&G referenced, right? It's like, but that's why analyzing both sides of it is important. Because like when you say like, Elon Musk has like a shit ton of money and like I don't, it's not the same. But like, from a perspective it is, right? Because like we're both like, laboring, we're both getting, a paycheck from that labor, and then we're both spending that, So it's from one perspective, it's like that, but that's not.
Well, Elon Musk doesn't labor.
Sorry?
Elon Musk doesn't labor, right? So when he sleeps, he still gets money.
I think he works really hard on terrible X posts. Like, I think that if he is
he not like working so when he does sleep he gets money, right? It's like,
right, but you're saying that as a comparison. So if I sleep for a theoretical month, I won't get money. But if he sleeps for a theoretical month, he could actually still get money, a lot of money. He could do that.
But I just think like, obviously, like sleeping
and not only that, but like both of us mutually cannot even think and fathom how much he can get from sleeping.
No, I am aware of that, but to say he doesn't labor, I mean, Marx's like alienation is like capitalists are still alienated from their species being, right? So like there's still like he's still doing something in order to accumulate, money while he sleeps. So it's like
this gets into the and there is a part of this that is about how the capitalist plays into this. And again, when we talk about capitalists, we're being very particular in this phrasing. The guys at Tesla who figured out how to create an automated factory, and the engineers who built it, and the engineers who designed it, and the people who monitor the machines, and the managers of that, this entire mass of people, their labor is exponentially more exploited than we would ever consider, because none of them get paid the actual production value of what they're doing. Musk, fascinatingly enough, the term labor, he still labors. I'm very hesitant to use that for the work that he does, because what he's doing and the game he's playing is far different than what we would traditionally call labor. And he is very much ultimately just taking. His work, the labor of any sort, whether that's how he sort of, I mean, really, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't design cars. He doesn't do any of that shit. He doesn't do it. And I know we all agree, fuck Elon Musk. I'm not saying you're a simp for Elon Musk in any way. We all agree he's a huge piece of shit human being. But the position he's in, I would say, is along the lines of like a Bezos now, or a Bill Gates now. That they live basically a life of leisure. Their decisions and the way their labor works is about looking at growth curves and making decisions based on those growth curves of things
like,
they'll say, because that's what he does. He says stuff that changes that curve. That's really his labor.
From the perspective of striation, that is very much labor. Like, I'm not saying that like I'm only approaching it from that perspective, but like that's labor. From a question of smooth space, we can question that.
Yeah,
sorry.
As I said, you are at risk of diluting the definition. If I exist as a human being and I labor to reproduce my existence, that's not in and of itself a form of productive work for humanity, which can be called labor in the Marxian sense. If I labor to make an axe handle so that I can sell it to a Japanese merchant, that is labor in and of itself, as in that is labor in the alienated sense of work being done.
I mean, to put it far more crass. Like, I'm just going to put it really crassly because I think it's just because it'll help separate. If Elon Musk jerks off, that's labor that he's getting money for in that way of thinking about it. I'm very hesitant to put that in the same category as what we would traditionally call labor for that reason. He's doing something.
This is like a very Fordist understanding of like, this is like Fordist capitalism. Like, we are in an age of post-Fordist capitalism in a striated sense. You know, it's a marketplace of ideas. Like, the idea is he is laboring in some sense in order to grow the company so he can sleep while he gets paid. Like, to say that, you know, I mean, and maybe that's going to be like my personal criticism of Marx, since like in a more contemporary fashion, when you look at people like, you know, Deleuze or Baudrillard or whatever, they're going to say like, it's this economy of science and this marketplace of ideas. So like Elon is like laboring, maybe not in a traditional, you know, Marxian sense, but like from the perspective of striation that means you're talking about.
There's a couple reasons. Just to step in, there's a couple reasons why I'm hesitant to do it. I don't have necessarily a Fordist view of labor, but instead I've been around people who are in the ultra wealthy category, and I don't believe that Elon Musk himself has actually conceptualized or done any of this, but instead it's actually the business advisors and people around him that, generally speaking, the closest he came was when he was working at PayPal and got fired.
Even way before then.
Even way before then, more difficult. But even like the ability to be part of that, managing, whether he was coding or not, maybe at that point. But when we start talking about like, oh, he decided or he talked about, I'm very hesitant to put him at the center because all of these very wealthy people have 900 business people around them making these other things happening, giving advice, telling them what to do. And they're a decision maker in some capacity they claim to be, when in reality, they're simply reacting to, here is the best possible thing I have. He had someone come to him and say, hey, here's what you do. You buy Tesla and then you spend a bunch of money over here to get the United States to actually subsidize the entire company. So that way you can be profitable for multiple years without having to do any work. That thing, he didn't conceptualize that. Someone else conceptualized that for him. And he was the vehicle through which these people did that sort of behavior. It's like whether or not he's doing any of it, again, becomes very problematic. And again, in the current structure, I think a lot of people, what they're doing is problematic, and it's tough to sort of say as a thing, but it's like, I actually find it really, I'm hesitant to say a capitalist in that sense, in that specific form of what he is, which is kind of an odd, almost, what's the term they use for it? The castrated, the capitalist eunuch.
Yeah.
I tend to say that he's in that category of the capitalist eunuch. And I think his general behavior patterns say that labor is an affirmative rather than he's simply with the flows and flux of the marketplace. You could say someone like, I mean, there are capitalists where I would actually say you can probably make arguments that, you know, I think you can make arguments for a lot of people. Musk is a unique one, and I think there's a handful of others.
if Musk is making a decision for a company, like that
But
is
he's not.
considered labor from a striated sense. Like even if you're saying that he's the vehicle by which that happens, even if he gets those ideas from other people, that is labor. Like that's what people
Hold on
just
a second. Hold on a second. Take a step back a bit, because what you're trying to incorporate is actually extreme in and of itself. When you're talking about making a decision, why is it that you allow for the what you would say is the Fordian perspective to bleed into the current issue in terms of Musk, right? So when he makes a decision, you go to yourself and you say, oh, he's spending so many calories in his central nervous system to say these words, which are then translated into some sort of meaningful dictate within his corporation. Right? I mean, if we want to get extremely reductive to the sense, then yeah, we can call that labor. But if we're going to speak English in a manner that is conducive to meaning, we should definitely take a step back, as I said, and consider the finite term.
I'm not speaking English. I'm saying from a post-Fordist sense that making decisions for a company, I mean, because the capitalist is alienated from their species being, for me, I feel like that is constituted as labor, especially when people are saying that. When people have to make those decisions, they're making an assessment on their company that could potentially bankrupt their company. So the labor that he's putting in by making a decision for a company constitutes him being alienated by his species being. And for me, in a post-Fordist sense, that's labor. In the same way that, like, an economy of ideas or think tanks, I also think that is labor too. And if you don't, I think that's like. Do
you recognize what you're trying to shuffle in there?
No, I don't.
You're trying to say that, oh, because he's spending energy existing, that's labor.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. Like that, because
if he didn't make that decision, and if indeed his decision had failed his company, he would. I can guarantee you, he will still be twice as rich next year as he is.
That doesn't matter. That's like not a question.
Actually, I'm gonna try. Hold up. Gonna mute you. Bup. I'm bupping. When I bup, it means hold up. Because I'm gonna try to restate. I'm gonna try to steelman a little bit of what Noah's saying, because I think it's an interesting distinction. So let's talk about. Let's say there's two people. Okay, let's say Elon Musk at some point makes a decision to hire a CEO, someone he will not have any control over, who will run Tesla. And the person does effectively all the things Elon would do in that same position, but is not the capitalist that Elon Musk is, and doesn't make money in the same way, whatever it is, but does all the same stuff Elon would do as CEO of Tesla, which, granted, very little, doesn't matter. My question would be, and this is to you, actually, it's to both of you. First, Noah, generally speaking, let me know if this is right, but what is the material difference in the labor done by Elon Musk in the position or someone he's hired in that position? Because I am one who does believe, just so to mention, I am one who does believe management is labor, especially in today's world.
Labor too, right? Like, I think that it's like, from the Marxist sense, it's like I put a hammer on a nail. Then let's pull it away.
The board hires this person to replace Elon Musk, and he separates. Does all the same stuff that Elon would have done otherwise, but Elon didn't make the choice, and he's basically fully castrated. Is that person doing labor or not?
That person not being Elon, the person being
the CEO of the company.
On the board?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would say so, because as a CEO of a company in post-Fordist capitalism, it's an economy of ideas. So if they are making those decisions for a company, then that is labor.
And DeBlow?
Yeah, I just want to interject, because what you mean by economy of ideas is that, yeah, he spends energy, he spends calories because he ate his last meal at lunch.
No.
He spends this exertion. That's literally what the phrase economy of ideas is getting.
That's not true. Like this is like Baudrillard's central argument about an economy of science. Sorry.
That's okay. DeBlow. Yeah, so did you hear my example?
The more that, yes, I am obviously particular. I'm particular to the example that you have provided, namely that is the sense of ownership towards a mechanism, towards a vehicle, the same as its, is it equivalent to the
Specifically, I'm
laborious
asking about the
management of-
work that's done. Is it labor or not for this new person who's doing all the things, but Musk has no control. Musk isn't part of it, fully castrated, separated from the company. Would he then be labor, this manager, Uber manager, CEO?
It's just to get to the fact that I'm not going, I want to answer this directly, and I will say, yes, it is labor, right?
Okay.
Yes, indeed, it is labor. I agree that managing a company can indeed be laborious, and it can be the act of labor that is done. It can be. But
Right.
let's get real with ourselves. There's no CEO, there's no executive officer that any of us can point to that is meaningfully doing labor in the sense of how it's presented in Capital One.
Pull back slightly because.
All right. The reason why I say this is because if their decision making were to fail, they would still be paid buckets of ducats. They would still be rewarded in this supposed capital system, right? In the system of capital that we have.
I have an example, if I may. If I may, this company was around for 3.5 years, 35 people. The CEO coded, designed, did actual work alongside everyone else, managed, hired, dealt with interpersonal relations, all that stuff. And the company failed. The CEO actually ended up not only less well off than before, but significantly worse off. That happens.
Can you make a concrete example, please?
Me. That story is me just now in the last 4 years. I had a company. I got an investment of $5 million that I raised. We hired out 34 people to build out a little bit of a games platform. It ended up not going nowhere. A handful of decisions were definitely my fault. I was CEO, that's the way it works. I was actually coding. I was actually building. I was actually doing art. I was designing. I was 80-hour weeks doing a whole bunch of different stuff alongside people. And in the end, we could not get secondary investment. The whole thing collapsed because of a handful of bad decisions on my part. And in the end, I lost, like, if you want to take from net to beginning, and I made good money during it. I'm not going to say I didn't make good money, but like, it paid for my rent. It paid for insurance. It paid for a handful. I've got to show for it a nice computer. But that's not wildly expensive. It's not that nice of a computer. And I have $110,000, $200,000 in the hole. Me as an example, CEO.
I still think that you're not quite getting so here's the thing. I know for a fact that a lot of people, when they get into Marxian literature, they then attempt to look back at their own life and then make forward projections as to how best to accommodate this information that they've received. It is not incumbent to say that Marxism is about, or rather socialism, I should say, is about equality and potentially equally being poor. That's not what we're getting at. It's the fact that even when a certain class of individuals does make actively bad decisions, they are still rewarded. That's a prominent
right.
factor.
But we were talking about CEO. So if we're talking about the capitalist class, very specifically, this is where we start getting into the definition of the thing, because his inability to be punished for mistakes he's made, and he's made insane mistakes. Like it's the idea that a CEO of a company would be allowed to take out multiple billions of dollars of loans against stock they own in that company in order to buy another company that has nothing to do with the first company is fucking insane. We live in an insane, fucked up nightmare land that he wasn't not only taken away, but that the board ended up rewarding him with even more money, begging him, please pay attention to Tesla. You're not going to get me to disagree with that. But the underneath.
Yeah, but the reason why I can't get you to disagree with it is because that's Riemann space. That is the superstructure with which the entire thing has to, the entirety has to be navigated by people such as us.
Okay, so to pull back, okay, I'm going to try to state this in a way that I think actually both of you are saying the same. I actually think you're talking past each other right here. So I'm going to try to avoid using the words that set all this off. We have the Riemann space and Euclidean space, this specific way that capital works and money works, commodity currency versus capital. People who small business owners all the way down, like the people who I want to open a food cart. That's my next thing, is I'm going to open a food court. So I'm a capitalist piece of shit in some way, but I'm operating in a very particular space with very specific amounts of money that is not fuzzy. I'm not operating on curves of cash. That's not where I'm at. It's not where any of us are. This space I'm living in, I'm doing labor. I work because ultimately decisions of mine have outcomes. There's consequences in some capacity for the decisions I make, good or bad, in a lot of ways. The capitalist class has no ability to fail. It's one of the defining features of it. Their failures are somehow still successes. An example would be predatory purchases of companies, the vampire capitalism, where they go into Toys R Us. They buy Toys R Us and then they create a second company that they then sell all the land that Toys R Us's are built on, that they owned, to that other company, and then charge themselves rent in order to extract all the rest of the profits and then sell off Toys R Us and destroy it in a multinational way, but still own all that land that they can then resell. So they make money in every direction. By actually collapsing a company, by making bad decisions, they make more money, quite literally, through that setup. This space that people are living in, that the capitalists exist in this really weird other space, the work that they're doing, and there's work done in the strictest sense of the thing, isn't quite equipable to labor, because ultimately it doesn't really matter what they do. They're going to generally be pretty much okay. When I used to work on Star Wars, I said it was one of the greatest curses you had was working on Star Wars, because at worst, you'd do fine. And that meant that you'd be coming out the other side of a product launch. Not only would you never really know if you did anything that made this meaningfully better, no one ever really knew because the brand was that strong, but at the same time, you'd never get spanked for doing really badly. Because it would do fine. People buy Star Wars garbage. We used to joke that George Lucas could shit in a box, and as long as it said Star Wars on it, people would buy it. This existence, labor becomes very difficult to talk about because it doesn't have the other connotations within Marxism. Am I generally in the right direction, Dublo?
Yes, but going forward, I would not use the word labor. Right, because only because like I would then have to account for the marketplace of ideas. Literally only because of that reason. Okay,
I didn't mean to use labor. I tried to use work quite literally in the terms of like doing a thing. But fair. Noah, do you generally get what I'm putting down?
I'm picking up what you're putting down. It's good.
Generally, do you generally agree with that too?
Yeah. I mean, I'm picking up everything here. I mean, I just, I think think tanks. I mean, I think that's labor. You know what I mean? Like,
here's. Let me make an argument against that. As actually, okay. We're now moving off the axiomatic. The stream is no longer the axiomatic. We're now debating what the fuck is labor as a thing. But I'm gonna make an argument against very specifically this, because I actually specifically. Like very, very specifically, ideas are the cheapest garbage that has ever existed. Like, it's hard for me to explain how absolutely shit ideas are as a thing or as an element that someone's creating. Someone has an idea for a game, that and $50 will get you a video game. Like, someone has an idea for a book, someone has an idea, like, ideas themselves are cheap shit. And what actually constitutes the success of one or another becomes a far more complicated, non-causative thing that is very difficult to actually understand or grasp in any meaningful way. I'm just going to give an example. I love these examples. VR hits and Oculus puts out a game. These guys really like Guitar Hero, and so instead of pressing buttons, they make a game where you use a lightsaber to cut things in half. Straight up saying fuck intellectual property in every single way. They call it Beat Saber instead of lightsaber. They actually almost get sued over that, having to change some things, change some logo, change some blah, blah. They sell pretty well. Oculus buys them for $6 billion. Some fucking stupid number for this fucking company that made one VR game as a thing. Their idea was something that was already on the market. Minecraft is actually just Infiniminer ripping off another game, one of the thousands of other games that literally were that same thing. Why Minecraft took off? I have theories, but ideas are... their marketplace of ideas is a thing I'm very hesitant to say is a useful thing because of the absolute lack of value that ideas have as a thing at all. That'd be my first argument.
Think about like the academic industrial complex, right? Like,
okay, thank you. You're getting right to the point.
What?
You're getting right to the point.
You're getting to the point. I love it. Do it. Yeah.
Yeah, think of the academic industrial complex. You have people who are generating ideas. There is this economy of ideas, and those ideas need to be profitable in order to be published, and that, that makes you a valuable worker. So it's like, yeah, you're laboring over ideas. There are think tanks. You bring up intellectual property. Apple pays people just to make a fuck ton of patents, and they don't even develop the patents. That's called patent ticketing.
So it's like, since a professor is producing in your words producing labor through the production of ideas, why do they have tenure?
That argument, that question, I just think is non-responsive. The fact that they have to sit down and labor and think to try and profit and create new ideas, I think that's the motor of capitalism. I think that's where I think that there is an alienation of thought that Marx is missing, in the same way that Marx misses the mark on like affective labor, the idea of emotional labor. I'm saying that I think...
So I'd like to remind you that tenure goes towards a person who approaches extreme old age. You can have tenure, and you can also be victim to
tenure tracks are going away in mass. I mean, I don't like capitalism can have tenure track, but capitalism profits off of newness. Like Deleuze and Guattari are talking about interior and exterior limits, and capitalism keeps pushing a limit further back. And that further limit is pushed back by presenting newness. That's why we're always at the end of history. We're pushing things back. And I think that there is these ideas of like laboring. There's this idea of laboring over ideas. Like there are people that get paid to be in think tanks. How is that not labor? Like doing something I don't want to do, having to think about making fucking patents for Apple so that they can make patents and not develop it. That is labor that I don't want to do, right? It's like a CEO might
to the question, it was about why professors get tenure. Like why? What is the structural reason for professors to get tenure if the marketplace of ideas is a rapidly responsive, exchange?
I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Just basically, why do professors get tenure?
Why do unions exist?
Unions exist because it's actually impossible to overcome the lobbying power of the capital class. I shouldn't even use this word. The phrase. I should simply say the owner class, right? The rentier class.
Yeah.
That's why unions exist.
Capitalism can exist without unions.
I can't tell you why professors get tenure in the same sense, right? So I can't. When you bring up the academic industrial complex, I can't relate that to the economic mechanisms that you're trying to allude to with.
It is an economic mechanism. The universities make so much money from publishing research. Like you can't divorce the academy from capitalism. I think the idea is capitalism thrives off of new ideas. It's the new and improved, and we labor from those ideas. Like capitalism can exist with or without tenure. Like that argument's just like nonsense, I think. in the context of this.
Be very careful. First off, I'm just going to say, when we're talking about this, we're not talking about other people being nonsense or other shit like that. Use better language and have a discussion here. We're all better than that. Just all three of us, just be careful with that. I want to ask actually a very specific thing, and I want to talk about a specific thing because D&G are actually pretty particular with how they handle a lot of this types of labor, and it's anti-production. It is actually to me, this is where labor starts becoming something else. The way anti-production operates, the academic space, the space that is purely this expungement of things. To go back to accursed share, blah blah blah, all this other shit that they talk about within Capital, and we make this sort of move towards talking about it being something else. To talk about academia as a thing, academia invented the iPhone. None of those professors, none of those research groups that invented any of the parts of the iPhone, they're on patents for it. They've made no money off of it. Their existence and their sort of toiling inside of research labs, creating materials, building new types of interfaces, for building circuits that do X, Y, and Z, things that do this other, like the way that the iPhone operates and how it works. None of it really was done at Apple. All the pieces were done at various academic sites. That work that's done there, calling it labor is tough because we're talking about being exploited in a very unique way, but also that they're also treated in a very unique way, and their existence is in a unique way. To kind of go back and talk about like the space that people live in inside of that is very different than that of the industrial research group who's trying to build a new tchotchke or this other new thing versus the academic space of that. I think I would say that these two would be different. This would be where I would think would be an interesting interlude. Am I off on that?
I agree that it's
right
different.
on the money. Like all those protocols that were published by Berkeley that dealt almost directly with like the firmware level of architecture, where they were making like almost precise algorithms that exploited the hardware that they were on at the time, right? So we're talking like things that are still used for the internet, for networking, for computers today, were released by some obscure graybeard back in the 80s and 90s.
So then this would be, and again, I do think it's a semantics question, but I love semantics, so I don't care. So when I say semantics, I don't mean it in that dismissive way, but in the actual way of being serious. This is about the semiotics of the structure of what we're talking about. When we say labor, I know people who do research work in those types of areas. I know people who do it in, like, there's people in media studies who are studying how like VR will do X, Y, and Z, like are building. That is work. And it is, I've called it colloquially labor. And I think they would be probably pissed if I didn't say that they were laboring, because they'd be like, well, that's a lot of work. I'm killing myself to do it. But they would not also compare themselves to a guy working in a industrial space. But at the end of the day, there is an extraordinary amount of actually in the system exploitation of that work that's done, because all of those people who actually designed and built, just like the engineers who made the robotics systems, which are primarily academic, that are now in Tesla factories, they're seeing none of that excess. Now, to your point earlier, and I think it's the thing that sort of is the question, the academic space is very often, I'm not saying it's great, but it's safer than the private sector, just safer in terms of like, look, my research went nowhere. I asked for a grant. They gave me this grant. I have to go fucking put in money for another bunch of grants. Is not the same thing as I'm here. I need to go raise money for profit for a company to make this other thing. Very different conversations, different types of things, different entities. I can't go to a state entity, for example, or a nonprofit. They do not invest in the things that they're not. Hey, I want to make a horror video game. Oh, excellent. Let's talk about that. Is not a thing that the state is ever going to do. But I want to study. That's Alexa. Fuck off. Really, Alexa? Fuck off. Shut up. Turn off.
Highly relevant to the conversation, by the way.
Phenomenally relevant, almost hilariously so. But on that same point, I think we hit this really strange thing where most of, and this is where I think the line starts becoming troublesome, and this is, again, to get back to our conversation about Riemann space versus Euclidean, or the two poles. Today, a lot of the quote unquote labor, I'm doing quotes in the air, you can't see it, but I am, the labor that's done is this odd intellectual, fairly safe labor that's done from a position of that. And I mean, who takes off, who becomes the next big star, who becomes the next big thing to make money. A lot of that is this intellectual, odd, safe labor done at larger and larger scales. And so we're going to see a crossover as we have less and less of what I would say is traditional risky labor, or even we see the academic, generally safe, turn into the more dangerous labor that isn't as safe.
I would actually be willing to totally agree with Noah if, on the condition that people who work and don't get paid in their sleep were also given the chance to labor in a place of their own choosing. I would be, so basically I'm saying, oh, okay, you want capitalism? Stop the feudalism.
So you mean like have a Spinozist existence where by day lens crafter, by night Batman kind of thing?
That analogy is way over my head, to be honest.
Spinoza made lenses. That was how he made his money. He literally grinded lenses for glasses for people. And at night, he was a Spinoza. That he was the writer we know and that we celebrate today. He didn't have a job being that very often. He was a lens grinder for money. Is that more what you're talking about?
He was both. You're saying that he was both taking people's eyesight by making them look at books and giving them eyesight by allowing them glasses.
And my favorite.
No, this isn't exact.
To diverge slightly, my favorite note on that though is Leibniz and Spinoza corresponded, and I was so excited to read it because it's like, holy shit, I want to know what they talked about. Yeah. They talked about how to make lenses.
Oh, I didn't know that. I had no idea.
Yeah, that's it. They talked about, he was asking for recommendations on how to make lenses and who to go to. Just like I would ask you for like a carpenter.
So here's the thing.
Leibniz asking of Spinoza. It's really fun. I'll share it with you in a little bit. Go ahead. Sorry, Noah.
So of course, like Brooks, like labor can obviously be divided into like, there are some safer forms, there are maybe some unsafe forms and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's still labor. From a Marxist sense, when you take like the pillars of alienation and that like analyzing labor from that, someone who's working in a think tank or like developing, there are people that like develop patents for Google. Like their job is to think of ideas to get competitors out of the marketplace. There's a court case, Humera, in court right now about whether that's anti-monopolistic or blah, blah, blah. But the reality is they're still alienated from their time. They're alienated from the product that they produce. They're alienated from their species being, so on and so forth. So yes, of course, the labor is different. Like I wrote in the chat, like Elon is obviously, the labor he does is much different than like the person who cleans the bathrooms at SpaceX. But at the end of the day, it's still labor, right? It's
so
like
let's talk about that specific example because I think it's I have a little insight into it. I have a friend who's on a bunch of Google's patents, who's an engineer, he's a very talented guy. The process isn't so much that he sits around thinking of patents. It's that Google has explicitly a 80-20 time slot where 80% of the time you do Google shit, 20% of the time they pay you to do whatever. That whatever they still own. And so people don't sit around thinking about patents. Instead, they're working on side projects or this or that. Like, oh, I kind of like this. Let me try this. Let me try that. And the vast majority of it, when I say vast majority, I mean 99.999% of that time is wholly wasted and thrown out. And Google knows this. The other 1 out of a million things, moonshots, becomes Google Wallet, for example, becomes Google Wave, becomes X, which is one of the alphabet companies, which only does moonshots. And the way that those things are set up is it's not so much that people are laboring to build new shit. It's that people are tinkering and playing around and doing stuff. And at some point, if a thing becomes interesting, they then take that after that point. So that early stage is wholly unknown. In fact, Google doesn't know really what most of their people are doing during that 20%, because most of it's like they're fucking around building this kind of shader for WebGL, which no one cares about and no one ever will. That kind of thing tends to be the patent is the accident and the after effect that makes it seem like there's intention there, but there isn't. So the process is people tinker. At some point, they like a thing, they show it to their boss. Multiple people maybe play with it during the 20%. It builds a thing. And over time, as they define it, they bring in someone from product, they bring in someone from marketing. And at that point, they go, oh, this could be a thing. And then they take it to the lawyers, and the lawyers go through the process of patent work. Now, to me, every step of the way for this, I would qualify as being this sort of thing we're talking about, this problematic area. I'm playing around for 20%, doesn't matter what I do. Is that labor in the same way that the other 80%, where they're sitting and coding Google algorithms all day, or product X, or the new AdSense algorithm, or how the front page for the new AdSense platform? That to me is 100% labor. That's flat out labor as we're talking about it. Then the sort of next step would be that 20%, which is play. They're basically paid to do whatever. At some point, it becomes more actualized. We make that move into, oh, here's what it is. Here's how it can be profitable. Here's why it's worth doing. Then labor is again committed. I believe the labor from the lawyers exists, who are going through and filing and drawing up the paperwork and doing all those things. But none of that's ideating. Ideating in this process is incredibly limited, because like the new idea that things crystallize around, that to me, I'm hesitant to call that labor. All the work that's done once that thing has been crystallized, to me, that is labor. And maybe it's a weird specific line, but this tends to be how I think about it.
Yeah, and that labor is basically anarchistic. It's not itself anarchy, but it follows tenets that simply avoid dictation.
No, and like I'm agreeing here too. It's like, I'm not familiar with like an 80-20 split. Like some of the research I'm doing is like there are legitimate think tanks for medical companies and tech companies and even environmental tech companies that their sole job is to just work to develop patents. Making patents is quite difficult, and like how you sometimes write them to try and get as narrow as possible without being too narrow, right? So it can be applied broadly to run competitors out of the market. Like patent trolling is a thing that people get paid for. Now, like in the same way that like a professor has to come up with a new idea. Now, I don't know. Like I think that like both of you are definitely right on this question out now. If there's that like 20% of playtime to just do fucking nothing or do whatever you want.
So specifically,
and, like, you
this is important.
Come up with an idea, is that labor? Like that I'm definitely willing to.
So let's talk, because now that I know what you're referring to, and we've talked about this offline, very specifically, you're talking about there's a guy who's looking through patents actively, like right now, he's like sitting on Google Patents or whatever the fuck else, and he's noticing, oh, that's interesting. A lot of people are using this patent. Let me tweak it. And he's engineering a new type of patent that would go around the other thing, or that would subsume another thing or another product that's out there. Sure. And he's literally doing that work to basically submit, so that way he can then go through the process of patent troll and legally be a piece of shit. Sorry. To sort of fuck with people who already have patents or haven't filed them yet, or to control things in the future. That work that's done in that specific space, where that's the guy, basically the guy's job. There are farms that do this. There are patent farms that do this. This is accurate. That's actually a really interesting specific thing. I'd love to do. Do you know about this stuff, Dublo? Because it's a really interesting, very specific use case.
Only tangentially.
And like, remember, this is different than like reverse engineering, where you're just like reverse engineering a product. It's just like they are thinking of ideas about how to manipulate patents.
I don't believe they're thinking of ideas.
Well,
I specifically don't think they're thinking of ideas. You said that your archetype that you're trying to draw up is a patent troll.
Yeah, patent trolling is a term that we use in law to kind of talk about like companies that try to mass produce patents with the sole purpose of not developing them to run competitors out of the market.
Again, I've got it. I know what's okay in the space of, so I know what's happening here. As So Noah, very specifically, the thinking work isn't a thing. This is a bullshit non-labor activity. Now let's be very specific about what that means, though, because lawyers, for example, spend a lot of time thinking about court cases and relating them to each other and doing this. Politicians writing things. Writers spend a lot of time thinking before they write a book. I spent just now a few moments thinking before I said words, and we put them into this, and people are watching me do it. There's the thinking, but then most of the thing you're talking about is actually what I would consider label. It's not an intellectual thing. It is the drafting, the diagramming, the writing, the turning the thing from the conversation around in my head, it's a bunch of fuzzy shit. And as a lawyer, look, I'm pulling case law. I'm writing and referring to each other. I'm noticing different, like that to me, and please tell me if I'm wrong. This is labor that's being done. It's being placed in the world and written down, and someone's doing a bunch of stuff in that way, the same way that someone writing a book is labor, or writing copy for a website is labor. But sitting back with a cigar and thinking, what are the ways in which I can do stuff? This is not labor. This would be a more delineating line.
See, I don't agree with that, though.
How so?
Because
how is it possibly useful? But think tanks, we say that, but the people at think tanks don't sit around and think. I've done it. I know the work. They have books laid out. They get together. They draw shit out. They diagram. They're working through stuff. They're constantly
you're trying to divorce,
actually laboring.
You're trying to divorce like material action from like cognitive labor. I think cognitive labor, like people sitting around a table trying to figure out fucking ideas to write the next show, or they're going to get fired from their job. Like
yes, but again, and I'll say this as someone who primarily most of my work is intellectual, and I don't mean that in that I'm a smart guy way, but in I design. Like a designer's work is primarily intellectual. There's the thinking process, which, and again, I'm not going to divorce material from immaterial, but specifically the way in my brain things rolling around as I sit there versus the reality of what most of it is, which is I'm sitting on a computer and I'm pulling up PDFs, I'm drawing over here, I'm relating it over here, I'm sending notes to someone else. This thinking process, and it's a very active process that is absolutely labor in every single way, versus I'm just going to sit and think, which I don't think that actually happens. Like as a thing, there's not a lot of I'm going to have tea and not read a book, not write anything down, not discuss it with others, not get it actualized, just in my head, have things rolling around. That would be my question. Is like, does that actually happen? I know lawyers, there is like, you may have an aha moment where you go, oh fuck, I figured out what I need to do, and it's been rolling around bothering you for 2 or 3 days. You didn't do 2 or 3 days of labor. This shit was rolling around, but now you have an idea,
but
and
why
you can.
Not?
Let me answer that question.
Because 72 hours of thinking did not happen.
But thinking did, even if you didn't want to think it. Like if you're forced to, and you're still alienated from those thoughts.
Right, and then when Jessica Rabbit showed up in that same thought, because it was an intrusive thought, is that still thinking? Is that labor? That seems silly to go, well, all thinking. This is where I would say this is where, for me, labor switches off. Now, if I'm sitting and I'm working and I'm writing down ideas and I'm cross-referencing them and all of that, the labor of that, the movement from the fuzzy to the more actual, this is, in my understanding of things and how I would describe it, much more labor than someone sitting around and letting things roll around.
But like you're assuming, like I'm saying, like easily daydreaming, Jeremy Bentham, for example, a utilitarian, says like, imagination can be very pleasurable, but it can also be very painful too. Yes. So it's like when we're forced to come up with these ideas and labor over them and like have to put concepts together in order to generate something that's sellable or profitable, it's like, I might not want to have to do that shit. There were many essays that I just didn't want to have to write, but I had to because of the academic industrial complex. There's a lot of thinking.
Can you entertain the idea that someone would invert the equation you're making and go to extreme lengths to make something that is not profitable, specifically not profitable. Can you do that?
Can I make something not profitable?
No. Can you think of someone being in that position where they're just like, fuck it all, they're running in the literal opposite direction? Like Dadaists, for example, when they were getting going.
So like making a TV show that I know is not profitable for Netflix.
No, not a TV show. Making anything.
Yeah,
just
I
doing
guess I'm
some
just confused,
participating in culture, such that what you produce is specifically not profitable and is incoherent to the capitalist structure.
If like we're assuming that is like if it's true, like for capitalist realism, it's not going to be true, right? Like for
we're
Baudrillard,
not fans of the Mark Fisher here. We're not an ideological.
But like Baudrillard, he's going to say even efforts that try to like say
right, but we're in the middle of discussing Anti-Oedipus, deleuze, and guattari. So there are other thoughts. Okay. So let's specifically say, can you think of a process with which someone would make something that is explicitly not related to profit in any capacity whatsoever?
Like me painting for fun. Like that?
It would have to be laborious, as in to say it's something that you don't do for fun, right? It is by labor that you have done so.
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, can labor not be fun sometimes, right? Like, I don't know.
Wait. We're getting the terms a bit confused here, right? You're bringing up the idea that think tanks, by necessity of them, of the individuals thinking, that thus they're producing some sort of labor ostensibly for profitable ends.
Yes.
I'm simply trying to get you to think of an idea where someone would go to extremes in producing an item, object, or some commodity that is specifically not profitable.
Of course.
Proceed.
Like not like I have like friends who will like try to make like maybe like a backpack for themselves that fits easier. So like they'll go through extreme ways to think about how to like make a backpack better. They're not trying to profit off of it, but that's what they do. Yeah. Like that. Like I guess I'm just sorry. I guess I'm a little confused. Like that's putting in a lot of labor to try and make something, easier to use for themselves, not for profit.
Well, the individual who made it is now profiting from the backpack.
Right.
Profiting
if you're
as in
willing
like
to
making their life easier, sure. But like, for Marx, I can hit a hammer or I can hit a nail on the wall and like, put a photo up. But if I'm at my job where I am alienated from, if I have to put a hammer on a nail, I'm, alienated from that. So it's like, I can still do that action. One is considered labor, one is not. And I'm saying the same thing can happen with thinking. Some thinking can be considered labor and some cannot.
Okay, if you're going to categorize things, then yeah, I would agree with that. Simply because the interest on labor is not itself a profitable dividend, right? So when they're thinking of the next TV show, they have to do it in a deadline, right? So that deadline is what makes the thinking relevant. The fast thinker is going to have an advantage. The person whose ideas actually have a lot of quality is also going to have a potential advantage. So there's a translation in how they think, which makes it different.
Like why professor? I mean,
that makes it specifically quantitatively different. I just want to be very specific here because the place and contextualizing we're talking about now, which I agree with you on, is that the placement and context of the work that necessitates all these other things. Again, the crystallizing around this thing does that. I would agree with you on that, I think.
By the way, do you think sleeping is thinking?
Well, like dreaming, sure. I mean, yeah.
So yes, you believe sleeping is indeed thinking.
Like sleeping itself is an act. I mean, like I don't know if I would say like walking is thinking, running is thinking, sleeping is thinking. But
so
I mean,
but consider what you're trying to introduce here. You're saying that people sit in a cubicle or an office meeting and they think about things, right? So they're actively engaged in idea production. Obviously,
Yeah, I
if
mean,
you're sleeping
yeah,
and you're dreaming about something, there's an idea that's in your head, right?
sure.
Okay, so we've established that indeed sleeping is indeed a form of thinking.
I mean, you can think when you sleep, sure, if that's what you're getting at. Yes.
Really?
You said
Fuck.
you said that
I've been
there's
dreaming
a
wrong.
simultaneity. You're bringing up the fact that there's a simultaneity in these acts, that you can think while you sleep, just as you can think while you walk, or you can think while you run or swim, right?
Sure.
Can you think while you think?
See, this is very interesting. I mean, like, and this is like, I'm glad the conversation is going in this kind of way, because I think what we're getting at is like, yes, like I can think when I walk, I can think when I work, but I can also think like while I'm working that I don't want to be thinking about what I have to be thinking about. Like being a professor, for example, it's like I have to be thinking about, you know, like publishing work, coming up with the next idea that's sellable. But I can also think like, fuck this, that I have to do this at my job.
But this is the reason why I want you to take a step back and consider what you're even getting at when you say that thinking is the labor. Because there is no act with which a human being can engage in where thought is not an ongoing process.
It basically means that labor is something that humans are always constantly in, and therefore puts us in a double bind. In the way I'm reading it, would be that technically all things we're always doing then are labor, and I don't actually know of a system that could possibly commensurately repay us for anything we do to a perfect degree. Therefore, life is exploitation in that way.
It would almost be like visiting a hospital and seeing someone in a coma and thinking, oh, we have to pay them for their labor.
Well, I think that this is all just like very different than having to produce an idea that
Yeah, I mean, they're producing ideas. Right?
Sure. I totally understand that, but producing an idea that one is laboring over. It's like
I cannot deduce whether or not their thoughts are laborious. I can simply say that they're having thoughts.
Well,
okay,
wait, real quick.
Fine.
So Noah would then, I think, I would ask, is it possible then for at any point thoughts to be labor until they've been actualized? Basically, is it possible for the way you're talking about it, that thoughts are actually not labor until they're turned into such a product, or until they're placed in a direction, or that they're put under sort of this schema that you're talking
saying
about?
That thinking itself can be constituted by labor. Like in AO, capitalism like utilizes like
Rick's question was important, by the way.
A very broad way to kind of create these like docile subjects that continue with shouting.
Right, but no. But the question is particular, because to me, and this is again, I love this kind of shit. So this is fun as shit.
Yeah, me too. Dude, I'm sorry for calling your argument nonsense. I was just getting kind of passionate. I sorry that I came off as an asshole.
It is
I enjoy talking with you. That's what I was saying there.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Before talking, it's necessary simply to think in a soliloquy, in a manner of soliloquy. It genuinely is necessary, right? So you
can't even just say, just real quick to blow, just be like, oh, it's cool. Just say that for me. Say, it's cool, Noah. And then continue your point, because he was given an honest apology there. He was. And I acknowledge that. Okay, good.
Yeah. Each of us does indeed have an air of egoism where we haven't even bothered to straighten out that edge, or to soften it up a bit, right? And so it's interpreted as, oh, this person is being excessively abrasive.
Understandable, man. I understandable, friend.
So here's
trillion down.
But this is the question, Noah. So I'm gonna talk about my existence, because I, as a person who supposedly is in the creative intellectual thinking man space, when I'm doing stuff, very often, I'm fortunate, I've been able to work in very specific industries that I do arouse my passions. Video games, VR, interactivity, film, television, writing, documentaries. I've been very fortunate. I do a lot of this stuff, and I do a lot of work in it without even caring necessarily about the profit motive in itself. So when I'm thinking, very often, and I think this would be true of even people who are explicitly paid to think in your think tank world, or people who are like trying to figure out the next big hit song to write, there's kind of this movement that happens where the mind, you let it play, and then at some point you realize there's a need. You have to do X by this deadline, or here's the kind of thing you need to edge. And it's aimed towards that singular point in the future, that profitability moment, whatever that may be. There's the old line from the Beatles of Lennon and McCartney saying, everyone thinks everything we do is deep, but really I just looked at Paul and said, it's time to write a swimming pool, which is a fucking great line. That space where the transition from the thought to the more actual directed. And then at that movement, to me, moves from what I would say non-labor to, I think what you're getting at, which is more labor-focused thought, which is more crushed, placed, directed, ordered intellectual work. But again, and this is, I think, Dublo's point, and I'll be frank, I think I'm torn a little bit here because I find it really interesting. But the work that's done intellectually, the thought, the thinking, until I actually code my first line, until I open Visual Studio, until I open Unreal, until I open OBS or a book or Word or Miro or a piece of paper, until I've done something to pull it out, everything until then isn't really labor, not in the sense.
That's where capitalism gets you, though, because it assumes
I'm agreeing.
that you have to be laboring over those things. Like, this is like the schizophrenic.
But labor exists in reference to capitalism.
Hey,
right.
Brooks, could I join the fray?
I mean, anyone's free to. Josh, please.
I think that it's going to take you kind of down a dark, endless rabbit hole to try and determine at what point there's some sort of a transition from aimless, non-laboring thought to thought which becomes labor. But by the same token, or along the same vein, I should say, I wanted to raise the issue of to what extent it makes sense to talk about profit, remuneration in flat terms. So there can be, if you start with thought, thought can be a very endless different colorations, different qualities, different senses, different directions. But to then talk about that thought, which then is connected, say, to labor, and then you plug in the labor with remuneration, with profit, with expectation of profit. The profit has a flatness, it seems to me, that is implied or is built into its notion, whereas the thought doesn't. So let me put this differently. If you can imagine that each of us, when we are laboring, or let's just say working, okay, let's say I'm a teacher, or I am a artist, a graphic artist, a commercial artist, that our expectations for profit, what the profit means to us, what the cash means to us when it's handed over to us, means something different to every person who is laboring, who is working. And what it means is connected up with how they understand what they're doing in a creative sense. It's an abstraction to talk about profit in terms that leave out of the equation this sense that money never means the same thing
I understand the question. Yeah, I get that. So first off, an acute definition of profit. A profit is any advantage that is given to an individual before something in the future. Before something in the future is demanded. So in the old days, a profit would be having a coat that you made for yourself in summer. or maybe even 4 for your family. And then your neighbor is still making his coat late in autumn. That would be a profit, right? So the way that I'm using profit is an emphasis on pro, right? So pro is a Latinate conjugate referring to time, usually referring to time, but it can also be space. It can be forward, it could be in advance of, right? And we still use this kind of terminology today in English. When we say, oh, I'm going to pay you in advance, it means I'm going to pay you with profit. I'm going to pay you with profit of time before that deadline.
Yeah, it's profit specifically comes from it means to advance. It's the forward movement. It's literally what it means. Is profit is forward movement.
But it still reflects an expectation of what it is that it deserves this profit.
Okay, I'll address that directly.
Yeah.
I'll address that directly. So for human beings, the most precious commodity or the most precious abstraction that we have is time in our life, right? So when we talk about the fact that Jeff Bezos or someone of his ilk is getting a lot of profit as a person, we're basically saying that he is affording every second, every minute of his life in a greater fashion, in a logarithmic scale, in comparison to a person who is cleaning the bathrooms or doing some literally laborious work in his office or something. Why? Because the person who is the blue collar worker is not only offering their life as a measure of time for Bezos, but is also doing it in a fashion that profits Bezos directly. Right? So it is indeed about time. Now, here's the thing. There's a disputation for the argument that I'm trying to present here. Namely that time is actually not an issue of it's not an issue that is relatable to human beings, right? We can't really manipulate time in our mental constructs as something that's malleable. It's easier to think of time as a manipulation of space. And when we think of space, what you refer to as, what we're getting at in terms of profit, as well as what you also said previously with money, or the word they used was cash, right? So cash in the pocket of a person. I would almost directly go to Adam Smith for that definition.
Or Ricardo.
So again, or even David Ricardo. So again, like I've established that, it's mostly about time, right? So being in advance of some due date, whether you think that's death or your rent payment or next year, it's not really relevant. It's that you're saving time for yourself. Now in space, money and cash is concerned with the ability to coordinate the labor of man, right? That is the literal definition that the classical liberals had thought of at the time. So we're going back to a few hundred years back, just previous to when the United States was founded. Right, so I'll say it again. The first definition that I have is that profit is concerned with being in advance of time. However, there's an orthogonal relation to that, as in to say, to make it more direct with how we understand our own existence, namely by space. And in that domain, money and cash is the ability to command the labor of other people. So I would also just, as a thing, because I think it's part of what you're saying, I think I would phrase slightly differently. Maybe it's not even the same point. It feels like it's in the same realm. Well, for me, one of the challenges when talking about labor is, like, we've got the abstract concept of labor, and I think that's where we tend to be getting hung up on, and I think a lot of the language here is really about that. For me, the point for Marx, and definitely the point for Deleuze and Guattari specifically, is the commodification of said labor. And I'm not sure how you can have commodification of thought qua thought, like within thought itself, but instead the commodification of intellectual labor, which is the actualization of thought into said
onto paper, onto written, whatever it is, turned into something more concrete. The marketplace of ideas isn't actually like a fully abstracted thing. The marketplace of ideas is where those thoughts become commodified, become placed into a marketplace, into something more. They have to become a thing. They have to become commodified. And that is where labor exists beyond the just purely abstract. And if it's purely abstract, like we're not dealing with things in the same way. Like this is, to me, the push I like, and it's where I think Marx, where Deleuze takes Marx and Guattari too, that I think is really important is to not talk about labor really qua labor, because labor is really just it's a thing, but really it's a regime change from desire, from libidinal desire. And it's a different regime of it. It's an exploitation in a very different way. But in the same way that desires can't be quantified until we claim them as our own and consume as such and denote and claim them. In the same way, labor, which is a social machine, which is it's desiring machines and under determined conditions. The determinate conditions part is incredibly important. The commodification part is incredibly important. Staying in the space of pure ideality or the ideas or thought space, thoughts don't have the ability to be commodified because they don't exist in a way that can be transmuted that way or translated. And that translation is part of the whole process that we're talking about. I mean, just to bring it back to even the conversation today, that translation is the point.
Yeah, the only thing I could point to would be like words, like a book. Right? So the commodity of an idea would simply be like someone selling a book.
Right, and I think like Brooks, and this is like why this is a great conversation, because I think Brooks, you're saying like with a book, for example, it's like the thought may precede the laborer's action, right, of writing that book. So you're saying that the thought's there, but until it's actualized, it's not labor, right?
Until it's in the process of that, yeah. And I think there's...
Yeah, and you know, and this is where it gets tricky, I think, because I don't know, I think like we've all probably been in the position where it's like, fuck, I have to like write, you know, or I don't know if like people are super
Wait, you watch your words there, because you said have to.
You did. Which I think is I think there was a Freudian slip there, no joke, that I think is part of it. It's the have to that you said.
Have to think?
Like that's have to write. Have to for example, like let's say you're a lawyer, like just as a thing, like this is why I would say labor to me, it's not about, it's corporeality, maybe a better term, the material, but the commodification of thoughts. A lawyer who comes to me and goes, you know what, I've been thinking about this case all week, I would kill him. Like I'd be like, what the fuck, dude? No, I've been thinking, don't worry, dude. I've been billing you for my thoughts. Genuinely, if a lawyer said that to me, I'd murder them. And I've been really angry with lawyers, but like they show me. It's part of the lawyer's work. You can't just go, well, you know what? Actually, yesterday I spent 20 minutes thinking about your stuff. What the fuck? Like,
no, I totally get what you're saying.
Networks Incorporated does or does not endorse this form of communication.
I fear that there is a privileging of like this body, maybe, or sorry, excuse me, like the mind, by like assuming that, you know, labor only implicates the body but not the mind, so the mind is like this kind of transcendent thing. Because
but yes, no, wait, yes, the answer is yes. I'm going to say yes, and I think if I had to guess, Jablo's going to completely disagree with me, but the answer is yes, because capitalism privileges that.
Yeah, by the way, I'm actually kind of stunned that you would use the word privilege, because that word in and of itself means self, right? So privy, as in to say, you know, like a small circle, a very, those who are privy to would be, you know, a very small circle of individuals. And then ledge, as in to say those who are privy to what is written, what is applicable to be given. A privilege is literally an object.
I hear
which
Noah
is,
furiously typing derivation of privilege.
No, but it's literally, so the reason why you have to use this in the mental construct is because only you can know about your thoughts. Only you can know about what you're thinking. It's technically not false for the lawyer to go to you and say, oh, I've been thinking about the project for an entire week. Please pay me for my thoughts. Because that's his privilege.
Yeah, like I mean, if a lawyer has a 2-week job, the first week they're just thinking and grinding through concepts in their head about legal theories to try and craft a new precedent.
But they're
or something
not.
Like that, and then
But they're not. Like no. I'm going to say no.
It's like invading your
yes,
sleep.
but no.
Same idea.
Because they're focused, concentrated labor. So again, I would say, maybe in response to your point, rather than saying maybe you're right, I would say let's remove the concept of thinking as a thing divorced from the body, because all body is thought, all movement is thought. If I'm like, thought has to be behind everything that's happening. It's the
I agree,
think
but I'm saying I think you're removing the body from it. Like I agree. I think I'm just
well, okay. Go ahead and do that. Do that. Is there an automaton with which you can point to that is producing thought at an analog in the same way that say airplanes fly and submarines swim, right? Is there some sort of mechanism?
No. But I'm saying, like, Brooks said that capitalism privileges the belief of like the mind over body in terms of labor. But
no. That's not what I said. That's close to what I said, but it's not what I said. My point in that was that you're like, oh, well, look, you're privileging one over the. And it's like, yes, capitalism specifically, because we're dealing with profit, which means commodification. Like, capitalism as a thing requires commodification. Commodification's the thing. I hope we agree on that. Commodification's like the thing. Capitalism's like super big on. You can't commodify a thought. You simply can't. Now, you can turn a thought into a commodity by doing X, Y, and Z and a bunch of other stuff, but thoughts themselves are not commodifiable. Even if I'm on the internet, clicking on a link because I thought it would be interesting is, to me, intellectual labor that's turning it into a commodity. It's not the thought anymore. It's now the action of the thought. It's the way capital deals with us is through the commodification of all these things. There is no labor, except in a purely abstract conceptual sense, that isn't part of commodity. Commodity labor is capitalism. And as such, it has to be something that is bodily, I guess would be the only way to put it. Corpus.
Or does it teach you that it's like not commodifiable?
Let me give you a further idea. In the same way that you said, if a person takes their own backpack and they make their own backpack and then they profit, they use their backpack in whatever way that they please. Can you take your own thoughts and then profit as an individual from the thoughts that you have just thought?
See, but like, why is that your understanding of labor in the first place? Like,
because of Marx.
Because
I'm saying, but this is a criticism of Marx, though. This has been from the beginning, in the same way that I said Marx.
Well, then I would ask what defines labor then? Because if we're not going by, and specifically, by the way, Marx's version is through Smith, is through Ricardo. The definition of labor specifically is an abstraction of that. It's not just work people do. Labor is a particular term. It's not the same as work. It's not the same as effort. Labor is...
Yeah, I'm seeking to expand that to cognitive labor in the same way that Marx doesn't take into account affective labor. That's a good feminist criticism of Marx about emotional labor.
That's what we're getting at. Like, what thought have you thought which has allowed you to produce more thoughts?
Or am I specifically let's fuck intellectual labor. I would ask, I kind of have to shit, but my body's holding it in so I can keep working. Is that labor? Sort of, but that's not really
laborious.
It's laborious. It sucks. But like, the things my body is doing that is not putting tchotchke on tchotchke.
That would mean that
what we're trying to get at is that the definition by which we're confining ourselves to the concept of labor is incredibly relevant. We're saying that MCM, right? So money being the ability to coordinate, basically your concept of thought in the marketplace of ideas is money, right? But then we're saying that, yeah, you have to turn that into a commodity, which itself goes back to the market as a realized effort of money. But that's not that, you know, you're not playing nice to the definition that we've established. And even if we were to disregard the Marxian framework, even someone such as Ford would have to account for why a thought would lead to further thoughts or some better efficiency of cognition.
What about the whole notion of, embodied cognition says that the flow of one thought to the next is a communication with oneself. And a communication with oneself isn't something that takes place solipsistically inside of a subjectivity. It is an environmental interaction. That's what the notion of the radical notion of embodiment tells us. So that it seems to me that the kind of distinctions that are being made here are the kind of they're sort of molar distinctions, which maybe, I'm trying to relate this to the discourse on capitalism of Deleuze, but I'm also I'm also wondering whether what's the kind of distinctions that are being made are distinctions that can only be made on the molar level, but on the sort of molecular level of designing machines that they disappear, that they become incoherent. This notion of that one thought isn't I forgot the word you use, responsive to another thought in the sense of enabling it or potentiating it. Well, of course they do. There really isn't a distinction at that level if you really sort of go into sort of an activist approaches within cognition and look at it that way. I think these kinds of distinctions between sort of just navel gazing and actual corporeal interaction with others sort of collapse.
Well, so, but again, I'm gonna real quick. I have a very specific example of this though, because when we talk about intellectual labor, we're talking about time spent towards a thing, and we're talking about it sort of in a semi-idealized state. A lawyer spends time thinking about it, so that way when he goes in and he says the line that gets his client off, he has his Perry Mason moment, or he figures out the case that'll break it, or whatever the fuck, or the time he's spent doing that, in theory, is labor that's being put towards it. There's an old line, though, to go and sort of return it back to a bodily trade. An electrician gets called to a guy's house, and he's like, I've had 10 electricians out here. They haven't been able to figure out what the fuck is wrong with my circuit breaker. And he goes, oh. And he looks around, he does some stuff. He spends about 10 minutes, and he goes, it'll be $1,000, but I think I can fix it. He goes, oh my God, it's 10 times as much as anyone else, but if you can do it, that's great. And the guy goes around back, disconnects the thing, reconnects it different, walks back up and says, that'll be $1,000. Took him 3 minutes. He's like, what the fuck? It was 3 minutes of work to do that? I'm not paying you $1,000. He goes, no, you're not paying for 3 minutes. You're paying for 25 years. That there's a line that happens where the actual event, the actual making of the thing, the moment of the commodity of labor being produced. Now, all of that time that guy has spent in the trades that has made him an expert in that way, it's labor, but that time is not labor. The 25 years is not labor. The labor was labor when he was doing the fucking labor. But that experience that has built up into him as he is sort of making his way through, is experience labor? That seems like now we're compounding labor to be almost completely meaningless. I would say it's just experience. Labor is the thing being exploited. Now, over time, as that guy, and he goes and does that thing, he's now throwing back. I would say the same is true of a lawyer. The intellectual work that is being done, and it is work, I'll say it's work, not labor. The labor where he goes and he does the Perry Mason moment and he says, aha, the glove does not fit, you must have quit, and everyone claps and it's on Silent Live and everyone's proud. All the time he spent trying to figure that out, that's great, all that work, but the labor was him doing the thing. Now, it's expensive, and it's combined with all that other shit, but it doesn't mean that labor was that time, was that experience, was that other shit that layers in. The moment of actualization, of commodification of that effort is labor in the capitalist sense.
I mean, imagine that Marx was just talking about primitive accumulation of ideas.
Yeah, actually. But real quick, I want to just, Noah, does that make sense to you as I'm outlining it?
No, like all of this completely makes sense. Like
Okay.
this like conversation is amazing. Like I love thinking about these kind of concepts.
By the way,
I think that
Josh,
for me
can you
though,
point
it's
to
like
can you point to a single thought that is independable from another?
That is what?
Independable, as in able to be distinguished.
There's no such thing.
Able to be
Yeah. So when you say that one thought leads to another, I would actually say that
yes.
that's the same thought that you're having, and you've been having the same thought since you were born.
so then
Yeah,
nothing is new.
Yeah, but we'll get to the Zen fucking paradoxes, Zen Cohen shit in a second. I want to talk with Noah real quick. We'll get to that because that's good shit. But I want to just make sure we touch onto this one. Noah, go ahead. You were saying.
But like, I mean, so like you yourself are admitting it's work, but not labor, right? So
Correct.
it's like now we're getting closer, right? And again,
well, it's work in the sense of time was spent, things were done, but in the same way that like when I go to work out, right, and I go for a run, there are other parts of my body that are getting a workout that aren't my legs, but I'm doing leg day. I'm thinking about doing it. All these things, there's stuff happening. But the output, the commodified output is leg day. The commodified output is lawyer talk. The commodified output is contract work or this or that. But without any actualization.
I'm just wondering if that's what capitalism teaches us, though. Like, I'm wondering if like that thought you're having right now is like that material like output is like what is valuable, not the thinking that went into it, right? That's not labor, but the material output is.
But I literally just said how we
apply
labor, how we apply value to it. I literally just said how we apply value to it.
I totally understand that, but how we apply value to it from the sense of, I don't know, capitalism. Like, why is there not value to that thinking if it took you a month to think of this concept?
Because if it didn't do anything, it's not worth anything.
According to who?
Well, I mean, according to the idea of what labor is and the market as well. If I think for a month,
but like the material
let me just say right now,
happen.
let's say I went, hey, I'm going to think for a month. I'm going to do nothing but thinking for a month to respond to this. And I came back to you and I said, Vanilla Ice stole David Bowie's music. Done. And I like stepped back. What? The fuck? Good job, Brooks. 1 month spent on that. Is that labor? It didn't do anything.
Well,
like it did nothing.
Right.
It didn't help you either.
It
didn't help you. It doesn't push us forward. It doesn't do anything. It's just rambling. Now, I'm not saying that can't be good. I'm a big believer in play and experimentation. But if it does nothing, it does nothing. Like if I spend
I'll tell you what it did do. I'll tell you what it did do. It verifies that you're still alive, that you still exist, and that because you were thinking, you were existing. Right? I think, therefore, I am. Thus, we know you are before us. You're a manifest, and that is verifiable because you were thinking in the entire time.
Well,
that's pretty much what it does. I mean, that's what I think that that's what I assume that you're probably getting confused with, is that cognition as a motor action between nerves and the body can be understood as thought.
Just going to say as a coaching thing, tend not to say things like where you're getting confused, but instead where we're having a miscommunication. Just saying tends to help. Because
I'm not Cartesian in any way.
I know. I'm just saying out loud, just being a nice guy, just trying to help move things. That's all. Because it's important.
If you're not
for
confused, that means I think that you could be trolling. You could be engaging in trolling, and I'm not saying that is a pejorative at all. But you are indeed driving.
You
are driving the conversation.
We're all trying to learn from each other.
I'm not trolling. I'm just saying that I think that the focus on the material output is something capitalism teaches us. So then when we are, docile subjects, we think that we're not putting in labor when in reality we are to uphold this system. And I think that, the material output is what capitalism says allows it to have value. But I'm saying that there's value inevitably there. And I think, let
me just pull back slightly because this is the interesting part is I would actually ask, are we? And because, and I know you're going to say, yes, of course, Brooks, of course we're fucking doing these things. Of course, well, we're not laboring. We're still doing stuff that is encouraging or building towards that, or that is building that capitalism is going to be using. I would ask that we pull back a little bit, and instead of thinking about the post-conscious, let's talk about the unconscious. Let's talk about the constant flux of desire, how desire is moving within us, and how we assign it based on what we consume at the end of it. We acclaim the entire process for ourselves. That thing, which is, in the same way Riemannian space and Euclidean space operate in the way they do, it's the same type of relationship to social production, to labor, because labor and desire are the same, by the way, orders of magnitude, same kind of thing. So when we have the way that we're talking about labor, I would say, perhaps when we're not laboring, capitalism's tricked us into not laboring, which sounds fucking weird, but think of it as the repression of labor that is not necessarily in the favor of capital. And so what we're doing in the time between labor is not really much of anything except being lovely repressed. A child left to their own devices will just do shit all fucking day. They'll do a billion fucking things. The energy is kind of insane for all of them. This is not one kid over another. People just can do shit. But over time, we kind of learn, here's where work is done. This is where we labor. Here's recreation. We put time into that. We've compartmentalized. We've placed labor into its specific use. And the rest of the time we have repressed labor, because we could be, just to mention, we all could be going out in front and probably filling a pothole. You could probably go find a pothole to fill right fucking now that would help your neighbors, period. You could go...
With this, I'm sorry, what this reminds me a little bit of is, within philosophy, you've got different camps in terms of, this one embraces a kind of a poetic version of philosophy. You saw that with Nietzsche and Heidegger. Oh, poetry is at the top of the hierarchy. And then for others, it's art. And then for someone else, it might be music. That is to say, these are all different modalities of expression. And for each one, they want to pick that as superior in some sense, as somehow more substantive, more valuable, more deserving of recognition in terms of its meaning. But what if one suggests that there's a creativity cycle, and then for one person, the top of the cycle happens to be music because they happen to be a musician, and music for them is the purest expression of ideas, much more pure than words, than poetry, than science. But for another person, it could be the concreteness of science. For another one, it could be abstract philosophy. But each one of us go through continuously throughout our lives, one creativity cycle after another. We start with an incipient, impressionistic sense of change, of a new way of looking at the world. And at first, it's absolutely, maybe it only appears in our dreams. We can't get a handle on it. We can't articulate it in terms of words at all. It's just a feeling. And then we move on to the next stage, maybe a kind of a musical stage, right? If we're not a musician, we're not going to express it in terms of music, but it has a musical feel to it. And then it moves on from there. So, but it's a mistake to say that any one of those modes is superior to the other. They all depend on each other. And it just so
I just
happens
wanted to take a moment to...
Okay, I'll give you a chance in a second. That we define, or a community defines the value in terms of what's recognizable to them. In the same way that if you look at a kind of a hierarchy of the origin of any technological idea, like the iPhone, if you take it back 150 years ago, you needed to have kind of the philosophical grounding, and then that you needed the mathematical grounding, new forms of understanding logic, boom, boom, boom. All along the way, the further back you go, the more absolutely groundbreaking the initial ideas were. I guarantee you, the less likely it was that the people that generated those ideas were making any kind of money. That the money comes with the recognizability of the ideas for the largest percentage of the population. That's why, Steve Jobs can make billions off of his idea, because he's taking ideas that other people have already put together, IBM and the mouse, this group and that, and he recognizes a kind of a practical need that people will embrace, that the largest number of people will embrace. So the largest sums of money are going to be connected with the largest number of people that recognize the idea. And that guarantees, in order to have something accessible, recognizable as valuable by the largest number of people, it's going to be somewhat banal. That is, it's already going to be commoditized by definition. It's already going to be filtered through so many eras of others that had labored under, before it reaches that point. That's why widgets, before the age of the technological age, it was, the people that were the billionaires made widgets and straws and, and oil. They were, these banal commodities that were accessible and needed by the largest, numbers of people.
So I just wanted to take a moment. I just wanted to take a moment. I definitely, I get the picture that you're painting here. I wanted to take a moment to say that, to retune Brooks' definition. Now, I actually made the mistake some time ago as well. Brooks said unconscious, but he actually meant subconscious when referring to the desire. The difference between the unconscious and the subconscious is, on the surface it feels as if it's being nitpicky, but the unconscious is the portion of our mind which we don't have access to. The subconscious is the portion with which we know it's there.
Pre-conscious, yes, the pre-conscious.
Yeah, exactly. We can't manipulate it directly. Right. So when we're talking about desire, right? I'm just assuming that you're talking about the subconscious. From there, what Josh is talking about, where basically like a figure such as Steve Jobs was able to understand the general public desire, right? So not so much like in a democratic way, like what is consulting them for their will, but simply predicting what they want, or what, like essentially what they desire before they even knew that fact.
I'm going to read a thing, because part of the reason I have my particular opinions is to try to bring it back, and then we're going to try to close this out, because we've been going for now over 3 hours. It'll be 3.5 probably when we're done, and that's a lot for my brain. I need to take a break after this, but I want to pull it back a little bit, because the context of AO and desire, the way that these things interact is desire is primarily emergent. And over time, as social positions are formed because of the environment, the earth socius, the interactions of the political social space, the social machines on desiring machines begins to fall back on this production, and they interact through time. There's the first desire that was formed was emergent, pure, and then over time, as it got more and more complicated and more things began happening, desires having to interact with the social space, with ideas that it even made and that it produced, but then kind of are crunching into it. The way that this changes in capitalism is not small, and it's the reason that the Axiomatic is important. To read from Holland, and I've shared my page if you want to just read along. Hence, one of the paradoxes of capitalism. The identity and nature of desiring production and social production is revealed in the same mode of production where the difference in regime between the two is the greatest. The other modes of production assign desire and labor to pre-established objects of investment, the earth, for example, the despot. And since human reproduction was still integral to social reproduction, the family remained a fully social institution. It is baked into the social, not formed, but baked into it. The abstract, subjective essence of labor and desire remained hidden due to their objectification in and by codification, yet they both belonged to the same overall regime of coding. Capitalism has no such overarching code. Axiomatization operates instead on decoded flows of abstract labor sundered from all pre-established objective determinations, at the same time as human reproduction is segregated from social reproduction in the nuclear family, which renders desire abstract as well. Such segregation has the additional effect of making the one appear completely separate from the other. The word appear there is very important to that sentence. I'll say it again. Such segregation has the additional effect of making the one appear completely separate from the other. Desire and labor henceforth apparently belong to entirely different regimes of production, desiring production and social production. This stratum is, again, the appear. There's a delusion. They use these terms a lot inside of these things. The way that they make themselves surface, the way that we define them, the way that we find them is part and parcel of this. And desire, which is always connecting, even when it doesn't connect, by the way, desire is still going, but we would not call it productive. Productive is part and parcel with labor, has to produce something. Just being there, just being a singularity, being the singular thought without producing is not a desiring machine. Desiring machine isn't a partial object. It's partial objects connecting and producing a sensation, which is left behind. Labor is necessarily the same process, more complex, but the same process. Does that make sense, Noah? I tried coming at it from a different direction.
No, I love it. I love it. I look. I'll be real with both of you. Like, I'm not fully content like with my theory of it here. I'm just
No, this is
just
good.
thinking through concepts. You know what I mean? And this is why I love the dialogue. It's like I don't know. For me, I do see both sides because I was having this conversation with someone else too. So yeah, I appreciate it. I think that was page 92 of Holland's book, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's very good.
Brooks, did you say just thinking does not really account for what it is that the desiring is going on within the desiring machines? Did you say something along those lines, or?
So it's when we talk about desiring production, labor and desire are kind of the same thing at different scales, different orders of magnitude, logarithmically, we would now say. And I'm going to start really pulling in a lot of shit having to do with these discussions we've had as I'm understanding them, because it's starting to actually help a lot the way that they're talking about the way that they are. Ultimately, we're talking about the same thing. There's a line. It's a fucking line. But there's these orders of magnitude that shift what it means really when we talk about a line and how these things sort of operate. The specific thing I was talking about there is the way that production within desire necessitates like production. Like it's part and parcel. We can't separate force from effect. Production produces. It can't be like an abstract thing that doesn't produce. Labor production has to produce. This is part and parcel of sort of the reason, I think it's the reason that Dublo and I are in specifically the place we're in. He may disagree with me entirely, which is fine, but specifically focused around the idea of if something isn't produced, is it labor? And thoughts don't produce thoughts. Thoughts run into thoughts, and there's really one run of thoughts that we're kind of constantly having. It's not the same as being produced. Desiring machines produce. A sensation is incurred. If to a partial object is just wandering around, it doesn't even wander. If a partial object's out there, it's not becoming something. There isn't anything. It's not a thing. There's no desire produced. Desire machine necessitates the production and consumption of desire. Labor is the production and consumption of labor. And necessarily it is processual.
Yeah,
is that far off to blow?
The one anomaly that I would say that would interdict this predicate is to bring up the fact that, I can make you feel hungry by injecting you with insulin or some substance, right? And it's true that the direct manipulation of my biomechanical body or a biomechanical body will result in a subconscious desire, which itself is artificial. But obviously there's a relevant border before we can even bring this up as potentially auxiliary to what you're saying.
Right. So, and I'm going to actually go back real quick. Sorry, Josh, because I'm going to go back as someone on YouTube actually makes me want to go back and ask a very particular question. I'm going to go back to Noah's old argument now because I know I've already passed it, but it is an interesting thing to consider. So let's say I run a company that writes internet posts, okay? And then Noah's got a company that puts bottle caps on bottles. And we each have 2 employees. Employee 1 for both of us is much faster. Employee 2 is much slower. Now, the bottle cap guy, he's putting a bunch of bottle caps. He's super fast. The other guy is just slow at it. He doesn't have the dexterity. He's not as good. His labor differs. The labor difference between the 2 is significantly different. And that's because of a multitude of things. But generally speaking, we do talk about labor as a thing, right? The other half of that, though, is my guys who are like sitting there and typing away. One of them's really quick and is able to think of really clever tweets to send out. The other one is not, much slower. Again, same thing. Their output is significantly different, but the labor is identical. They're both typing 140 words. So labor is identical, not as fast and not as good. And maybe in the end, I'm more making my point rather than Noah's, but the work done before them is still almost ultimately identical in terms of how the profit motive or how labor is seen. And actually, in the end, I'm kind of making my own point after we get there. Yeah, this is it's such an interesting discussion. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
I understand that. I just wanted to clarify your previous discussion or description of sort of this a kind of a thinking which isn't going anywhere, right? Which you wouldn't want to pay for somebody. You wouldn't want to pay that lawyer who says, "I was just thinking last night." If it was just this random thinking, which okay. So my question
you might
is,
want to, by the way. Like if you knew that person was going to rebel, you would probably want to like pay them to just sit around and do nothing.
It's actually called, it's a Japanese term called special projects. I got put on it at a company because there were 4, it's real. There were 4 or 5 of us that were too valuable to let a competitor have, but that they didn't want us doing any real work. So they paid us better, gave us the ability to do whatever we wanted so we wouldn't go somewhere else. It's a real thing. It's wild.
We could go in. Yeah. We could go into the book "Bullshit Jobs," and we could have a field day with those examples.
Yeah.
But so getting back to the okay, so you got this example of this, of this aimless thinking which isn't going anywhere. I just wanted you to just clarify how you would plug that into what within the dimension of the molecular activity of the of desiring machines. That's still production within that dimension, right? But it's not production if you're understanding it from the point of view or from the dimension of capital, right? Is that anything like what you had in mind?
Say that one more time for me. Sorry, I caught half the words.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. I understand your question. So basically, you're getting at simply because something like an advertisement can cause a person to desire something, even though it's like a sexy woman on a car advertisement, and they're not selling bikinis or anything, but there's an artificial desire that a person has, or is at least associating operantly, perhaps, with the commodity being sold. And you're saying that, is that production? You're saying, is that a form of productive activity that's going on?
Well, what I meant was
when they realized by buying the car.
That well, again, my focus was on a molecular level. I think that what you're describing would be in terms of the understanding of capitalist axiomatics, that your example there would be relevant to that level of analysis. But I think from a molecular level, when you're trying to understand what it would mean to talk about, say, non-productive thought, or would that be coherent when you're talking about trying to understand what it is that at the molecular level, what the desiring machines do in terms of all the various syntheses that are taking place, that kind of primary productivity would have to be always in effect, already in effect, even with the most aimless kind of thinking imaginable, right?
So I assume by molecular you mean kinetic.
Yeah, I meant, yeah, I mean, the various ways that Deleuze talks about this.
Molecular, the smallest, at the smallest space, the smallest interactions, molecular versus molar.
You know, body without organs, yeah, all of those kinds of, you know, paradoxical, virtual things that take place at that, yeah, within that dimension. When you flip things over to that dimension, you've got this continuous activity, and there's nothing that's non-productive or anti-productive.
Okay, so one thing that I want to put on the table is the concept of subsistence, right? So when people simply get by through doing activity that they would then themselves consume, this is called subsistence, right? So they're not putting things in the market. They're not trying to create a surplus. They're not trying to create an overflow of productivity that they can then sell as export. They're simply they're simply growing from the land and then consuming what they grow, right? So assuming that that's like, again, when you say molecular, assuming that the barrier between the biomechanics and the molecular is not talking about our ability to sustain our laborious effort, our ability to reproduce our labor in a day-to-day basis. Assuming that's already on the table, then your question is getting into the idea of the backpack that the analogy of the backpack that we made a few moments back. Like, is it really relevant that we drive ourselves towards profit if something that is so inconceivably unprofitable can be itself highly valued?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suspect that it's probably a tangent to try and understand this. What takes place when Deleuze talks about sort of flipping from one dimension to the other, from the molecular to the molar, because it's one of the things I've had the most trouble with, and I finally reconciled my thinking about this by simply understanding that it's. I don't think that I'll ever satisfy myself that I'll be able to come up with some sort of a clear process by which strata ends up changing through their interaction, or I mean, for example, Deleuze talks about how even in the most stuck sort of fascist kind of regime, that there's always this stuff that's particles that are sort of active around them, which ultimately lead to lines of flight and ways of being able to get unstuck from that stratum. So I guess the direction I was going with that question was, what precisely is this relationship between what this, the activity at the molecular level that ultimately leads to these new lines of flight, to getting unstuck from from these very rigid kinds of strata, and that's an extremely difficult question to answer, and it's probably actually.
Yeah, no, in some regard you're correct. Here's the thing, though. Yeah. In terms of magnitude, two parallel lines, regardless of which direction they're going in, are the same, so long as they have the same magnitude, right? So two vectors that are parallel themselves are identical, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, right? So the positive or negative realization is not relevant to whether they are conceptually identical, whether they are cognate to one another. They're effectively the same, and there's ambiguity between them. So what I'm saying is, don't fear the idea that opposites can actually be identical.
Okay.
Now, there's another posit that you made about the molecularity of, I guess,
I'm gonna but sorry, we have literally this will have been 3.5 hours. And we can continue. I'm gonna close out the YouTube and the recording so my brain can turn off for a minute and I can digest. I need to get some water for myself. We don't have to leave, though. Don't have to leave. But I'm shutting off the YouTube and the stream because these poor people. So with that, be watching tomorrow night. I'll be continuing the Axiomatic from here. We'll be moving into a little bit more of Daniel Smith's work, as well as a little deeper into some DNR stuff and some Holland. And otherwise, we'll see you guys all